That excellent and most engrossing volume was primarily a treatise on Slavonic folklore, illustrated with admirable skill and judgment by stories mainly selected from the vast collection of Afanasiev, who did for the Russian what Asbjörnsen has done for the Norwegian folktale. A year after the appearance of Mr Ralston's book, the eminent Russian historian and archaeologist Peter Nikolaevich Polevoi, well known too as an able and ardent Shakespearean scholar, selected from the inexhaustible stores of Afanasiev some 36 of the Skazki, and worked them up into a fairy tale book which was published at St Petersburg in 1874 under the title of Popular Russian Tales. Mr Polevoi did his work excellently well, and while softening the crudities and smoothing out the occasional roughness of these charming stories, neither injured their simple texture nor overlaid the original pattern. It is from the first Russian edition of Mr Polevoi's book that the following selection has been made. With the single exception of Morozko, a variant of which will be familiar to those who know Mr Ralston's volume, none of these tales had seen the light in an English dress before the publication of the first edition of my book. For though both Ralston and Polevoi drew, for the most part, from the same copious stock, their purposes were so different that their selections naturally proved to be different also. As to the merits of these Skazki, they must be left to speak for themselves. It is a significant fact, however, that scholars who are equally familiar with the Russian Skazki and the German Märchen unhesitatingly give the palm both for fun and fancy to the former. R.N.B. End of translator's preface. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. The Golden Mountain. There was once upon a time a merchant's son who squandered and wasted all his goods. To such a pass did he come at last that he had nothing to eat. So he seized a spade, went out into the marketplace, and began waiting to see if anyone would hire him as a laborer. And behold, the merchant who was 1 in 700 came along that way in his gilded coach. All the day laborers saw him, and the whole lot of them immediately scattered in every direction and bid themselves in corners. The merchant's son alone of them all remained standing in the marketplace. "Do you want work, young man?" said the merchant, who was 1 in 700. "Then take hire from me." "Oh, right willingly. 'Twas for no other reason that I came to the marketplace." "And what wage do you require?" "If you lay me down 100 rubles a day, 'tis a bargain." "Well, that is somewhat dear." "If you think it dear, go and seek a cheaper article. But this I know, crowds of people were here just now. You came, and away they all bolted." "Well agreed. Come tomorrow to the haven." The next day, early in the morning, our merchant's son came to the haven. The merchant, who was 1 in 700, had already been awaiting him some time. They went on board ship and went to sea. They sailed and sailed. In the midst of the sea, an island appeared. On this island stood high mountains, and on the seashore something or other was burning like fire. "Can that which I see be fire?" said the merchant's son. "Nay, that is my little golden castle." They drew near to the island, they went ashore. His wife and daughter came forth to meet the merchant, who was 1 in 700, and the daughter was beautiful with a beauty that no man can imagine or devise, and no tale can tell. As soon as they had greeted one another, they went on to the castle, and took the new laborer with them. They sat them down at table, and began to eat, drink, and be merry. "A fig for today," said the host. "Today we'll feast, tomorrow we'll work." The merchant's son was a fair youth, strong and stately, of a ruddy countenance like milk and blood, and he fell in love with the lovely damsel. She went out into the next room, she called him secretly, and gave him a flint and steel. "Take them," said she, "and if you should be in any need, use them." Next day, the merchant, who was 1 in 700, set out with his servant for the high golden mountain. They climbed and climbed, but they climbed not up to the top. They crawled and crawled, but they crawled not up to the top. "Well," said the merchant, "let's have a drink first of all." And the merchant handed him a sleeping potion. The laborer drank and fell asleep. The merchant drew out his knife, killed his wretched nag which he had brought with him, took out its entrails, put the young man into the horse's body, put the spade in too, sewed up the wound, and went and hid himself among the bushes. Suddenly there flew down a whole host of black iron-beaked ravens. They took up the carcass, carried it up into the mountain, and fell a-pecking it. They began eating up the horse, and soon pierced right down to the merchant's son. Then he awoke, beat off the black crows, looked hither and thither, and asked himself, "Where am I?" The merchant, who was 1 in 700, bawled up at him, "On the Golden Mountain. Come, take your spade and dig gold." So he digged and digged, throwing it all down below, and the merchant put it on wagons. By evening he had filled 9 wagons. "That'll do," cried the merchant, who was 1 in 700. "Thanks for your labor. Adieu." "But how about me? You may get on as best you can. 99 of your sort have perished on that mountain. You will just make up the 100. Thus spake the merchant and departed. "What's to be done now?" thought the merchant's son. "To get down from this mountain is quite impossible. I shall certainly starve to death." So there he stood on the mountain, and above him wheeled the black iron-beaked crows that plainly scented their prey. He began to bethink him, and then it occurred to him how the lovely damsel had taken him aside and given him the flint and steel, and said to him herself, "Take it, and if you are in need, make use of it." And look now, she did not say it in vain. Let us try it. The merchant's son took out the flint and steel, struck it once, and immediately out jumped 2 fair young heroes. "What do you want? What do you want?" "Take me from this mountain to the seashore." He had no sooner spoken than they took him under the arms and bore him carefully down from the mountain. The merchant's son walked about by the shore, and lo, a ship was sailing by the island. "Hi, good shipfolk, take me with you." "Hey, brother, we cannot stop. Such a stoppage would lose us 100 knots." The mariners passed by the island, contrary winds began to blow, a frightful hurricane arose. "Alas, he is plainly no simple man of our sort. We had better turn back and take him on board ship." So they returned to the island, stopped by the shore, took up the merchant's son, and conveyed him to his native town. A long time and a little time passed by, and then the merchant's son took his spade and again went out into the marketplace to wait for someone to hire him. Again the merchant, who was 1 in 700, passed by in his gilded carriage. The day laborers saw him and scattered in every direction and hid them in corners. The merchant's son was the sole solitary little one left. "Will you take hire from me?" said the merchant, who was 1 in 700. "Willingly. Put down 200 rubles a day and set me my work." "Rather dear, eh?" "If you find it dear, go and seek cheaper labor. You saw how many people were here, and the moment you appeared they all ran away." "Well then, done. Come tomorrow to the haven." The next morning they met at the haven, went on board the ship, and sailed to the island. There they ate and drank their fill 1 whole day, and the next day they got up and went toward the Golden Mountain. They arrived there. The merchant, who was 1 in 700, pulled out his drinking glass. "Come now, let us have a drink first," said he. "Stop, mine host. You who are the chief ought to drink the first. Let me treat you with mine own drink." And the merchant's son, who had betimes provided himself with a sleeping potion, poured out a full glass of it, and gave it to the merchant, who was 1 in 700. He drank it off and fell into a sound sleep. The merchant's son slaughtered the sorriest horse, disemboweled it, laid his host in the horse's body, put the spade thereto, sewed up the wound, and went and hid himself among the bushes. Instantly the black iron-beaked crows flew down, took up the carcass, carried it to the mountain, and fell a-pecking at it. The merchant, who was 1 in 700, awoke and looked hither and thither. "Where am I?" he asked. "On the mountain," bawled the merchant's son. "Take your spade and dig gold. If you dig much, I will show you how to get off the mountain." The merchant, who was 1 in 700, took his spade and dug and dug. He dug up 20 wagon loads. "Stop, that's enough now," said the merchant's son. "Thanks for your labor and goodbye." "But what about me?" "You? Why, get on as best you can. 99 of your sort have perished on that mountain. You can make up the 100. So the merchant's son took all the 20 wagons, went to the golden castle, married the lovely damsel, the daughter of the merchant, who was 1 in 700, took possession of all her riches, and came to live in the capital with his whole family. But the merchant who was 1 in 700 remained there on the mountain, and the black iron-beaked crows picked his bones. End of The Golden Mountain. Recording by expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Note: Morozko is a caressing diminutive of Russian Moroz or Frost. Perhaps Jack Frost is the nearest English equivalent. End of note. There was once a stepmother who, besides her stepdaughter, had a daughter of her own. Whatever her own daughter might do, she looked kindly at her and said, "Sensible darling." But as for the stepdaughter, whatever she might do to please, it was always taken amiss. Everything she did was wrong, and not as it should be. Yet, sooth to say, the little stepdaughter was as good as gold. In good hands she would have swum in cheese and butter, but living with her stepmother she bathed herself every day in tears. What was she to do? The blast, though it blows, does not blow forever, but a scolding old woman it is not so easy to avoid. She will take anything into her hand, even to combing one's teeth. And the stepmother took it into her head to drive her stepdaughter from the house. Take her away, my old man, whithersoever you like, that mine eyes may not see her, that my ears may not hear of her. But don't take her to my own daughter in the warm room, take her rather into the bare fields, to the bitter, biting frost. The old man began to lament and weep, but for all that he put his daughter in the sledge. He would have liked to cover her with a horsecloth, but even that he dared not do. So he took the homeless one into the bare fields, threw her on a heap of snow, crossed himself, and hastened home as fast as possible, that his eyes might not see his daughter's death. There the poor little thing remained on the fringe of the forest, sat down under a fir tree, shivered, and softly said her prayers. All at once she heard something. Morozko was crackling in a fir tree not far off, and he leaped from fir to fir and snapped his fingers. And look, now he had come to that fir beneath which the girl was sitting, and he snapped his fingers and leaped up and down and looked at the pretty girl. "Maiden, maiden, 'tis I, Moroz Rubinose. Welcome, Moroz. God must have sent thee to my poor sinful soul. Art thou warm, maiden?" "Warm, warm, dear little Father Morozushko." Morozko began to descend lower, and crackle still more, and snap his fingers more than ever, and again he began speaking to the girl. "Art thou warm, maiden? Art thou warm, beauty?" The girl was scarce able to draw her breath, and yet she kept on saying, "Yes, warm, Morozushko, warm, little father." Morozko crackled more than ever, and snapped his fingers harder and yet harder, and he said to the maiden for the last time, "Art thou warm, maiden? Art thou warm, beauty? Art thou warm, sweet clover?" The girl was all benumbed, and it was only in a voice scarcely audible that she could say, "Oh, yes, warm, darling little pigeon mine, Morozushko." Morozko quite loved her for her pretty speeches. He had compassion on the girl. He wrapped her in furs, warmed her with warm coverings, and brought her a coffer, high and heavy, full of bridal garments, and gave her a robe all garnished with gold and silver. She put it on, and oh, how beautiful and stately she looked. And she sat down and began to sing songs. And the stepmother was preparing her funeral feast and frying pancakes. "Be off, husband, and bury your daughter," she cried. And off the old man went. But the little dog under the table said, "Bow wow! The old man's daughter is going about in silver and gold, but the old woman's daughter no wooers will look at." "Silence, you fool! There's a pancake for you, and now say the wooers will take the old woman's daughter, but there's nothing left of the old man's daughter but her bones." The little dog ate the pancake, but again he said, "Bow wow! The old man's daughter goes about in silver and gold, but the old woman's daughter no wooers will look at." The old woman kept beating the dog and giving him pancakes, but the little dog would have his way and said, "The old man's daughter goes about in silver and gold, but the old woman's daughter no wooers will look at." The floors creaked, the doors flew open wide, and in they brought the high and heavy coffer, and behind it walked the stepdaughter in gold and silver, glittering like the sun. The stepmother looked at her and threw up her arms. Old man, put to a pair of horses and take my daughter at once. Put her in the self-same field, in the self-same place." And the old man took the daughter to the self-same place. And Moroz Rubinose came and looked at his guest and began to ask her, "Art thou warm, maiden?" "Be off with you," replied the old woman's daughter. "Or are you blind, not to see that my arms and legs are quite benumbed with cold?" Morozko began skipping and jumping. Fair words were not to be expected from that quarter, and he was angry with the stepdaughter and froze her to death. Old man, go and fetch my daughter. Put to my swift horses, and don't overturn the sledge and upset the coffer." But the little dog under the table said, "Bow wow! The wooers will wed the old man's daughter, but they'll bring home nothing of the old woman's daughter but a sack of bones. Don't lie, there's a cake. Take it and say they'll carry about the old woman's daughter in gold and silver." And the doors flew open. The nasty old woman ran out to meet her daughter, and instead of her she embraced a cold corpse. She began to howl and cry. She knew then that she had lost her wicked and envious daughter. End of Morozko. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. The Flying Ship. There was once upon a time an old man and an old woman, and they had 3 sons. 2 were clever, but the third was a fool. The old woman loved the first 2 and quite spoiled them, but the latter was always hardly treated. They heard that a writing had come from the Tsar which said, "Whoever builds a ship that can fly, to him will I give my daughter the Tsarevna to wife." The elder brothers resolved to go and seek their fortune, and they begged a blessing of their parents. The mother got ready their things for the journey and gave them something to eat on the way, and a flask of wine. And the fool began to beg them to send him off too. His mother told him he should not go. "Whither would you go, fool?" said she. "Why, the wolves would devour you." But the fool was always singing the same refrain, "I will go, I will go." His mother saw that she could do nothing with him, so she gave him a piece of dry bread and a flask of water, and quickly thrust him out of the house. The fool went, and at last he met an old man. They greeted each other. The old man asked the fool, "Whither are you going?" "Look now," said the fool, "the Tsar has promised to give his daughter to him who shall make a flying ship." "And can you then make such a ship?" "No, I cannot, but they'll make it for me somewhere." "And where is that somewhere?" "God only knows." "Well, in that case, sit down here. Rest and eat a bit. Take out what you have got in your knapsack." "Nay, it is such stuff that I am ashamed to show it to people." "Nonsense! Take it out. What God has given is quite good enough to be eaten." The fool undid his knapsack and could scarcely believe his eyes. There, instead of the dry crust of bread, lay white rolls and divers savory meats, and he gave of it to the old man. So they ate together, and the old man said to the fool, "Go into the wood, ride up to the first tree, cross yourself thrice, and strike the tree with your axe. Then fall with your face to the ground and wait till you are aroused. Then you will see before you a ship quite ready. Sit in it and fly wherever you like, and gather up everything you meet on your road." So our fool blessed the old man, took leave of him, and went into the wood. He went up to the first tree and did exactly as he had been commanded. He crossed himself 3 times, struck the tree with his axe, fell with his face to the ground, and went to sleep. In a little while someone or other awoke him. The fool rose up and saw the ship quite ready, and without thinking long about it, he sat in it, and the ship flew up into the air. It flew, and look, there on the road below, a man was lying with his ear to the damp earth. "Good day, uncle." "Good day." "What are you doing?" "I am listening to what is going on in the world." "Take a seat in the ship beside me." The man did not like to refuse, so he sat in the ship, and they flew on farther. They flew, and look, a man was coming along hopping on one leg, with the other leg tied tightly to his ear. "Good day, uncle. What are you hopping on one leg for?" "Why, if I were to untie the other, I should stride half round the world at a single stride." "Come and sit with us." The man sat down, and they flew on. They flew, and look, a man was standing with a gun and taking aim, but at what they could not see. "Good day, uncle. At what are you aiming? Not even a bird is to be seen." "What?" "I am shooting at short range. I could hit bird or beast at a distance of 100 leagues. That's what I call shooting. Sit down with us. This man also sat down with them, and they flew on farther. They flew, and look, a man was carrying on his back a whole sackload of bread. Good day, uncle. Whither are you going? I am going, he said, to get some bread for dinner. But you've got a whole sackload on your back already. That? Why, I should think nothing of eating all that at a single mouthful. Come and sit with us. The gobbler sat in the ship, and they went flying on farther. They flew, and look, a man was walking round a lake. Good day, uncle. What are you looking for? I want to drink, but I can find no water. But there's a whole lake before you. Why don't you drink of it? That? Why, that water would not be more than a mouthful to me. Then come and sit with us. He sat down, and again they flew on. They flew, and look, a man was walking in the forest, and on his shoulders was a bundle of wood. Good day, uncle. Why are you dragging about wood in the forest? But this is not common wood. What sort is it then? It is of such a sort that if you scatter it, a whole army will spring up. Sit down with us then. He sat down with them, and they flew on farther. They flew, and look, a man was carrying a sack of straw. Good day, uncle. Whither are you carrying that straw? To the village? Is there little straw in the village then? Nay, but this straw is of such a kind that if you scatter it on the hottest summer day, cold will immediately set in with snow and frost. Won't you sit with us then? Thank you, I will. Soon they flew into the Tsar's courtyard. The Tsar was sitting at table just then. He saw the flying ship, was much surprised, and sent out his servant to ask who was flying on that ship. The servant went to the ship and looked, and brought back word to the Tsar that 'twas but a single miserable little mujik who was flying the ship. The Tsar fell a-thinking. He did not relish the idea of giving his daughter to a simple mujik, and began to consider how he could rid him of this wretched son-in-law for a whole year. And so he thought, I'll give him many grievous tasks to do. So he immediately sent out to the fool with a command to get him, by the time the imperial meal was over, living and singing water. Now at the very time when the Tsar was giving this command to his servant, the first comrade whom the fool had met, that is to say the one who was listening to what was going on in the world, heard what the Tsar said, and told it to the fool. What shall I do now? Said the fool. Why, if I search for a year, and for my whole life too, I shall never find such water. Don't be afraid, said Swift of Foot to him. I'll manage it for you. The servant came and made known the Tsar's command. Say, I'll fetch it, replied the fool, and his comrade untied his other leg from his ear, ran off, and in a twinkling he drew from the end of the world some of the living and singing water. I must make haste and return presently, said he, and he sat down under a watermill and went to sleep. The Tsar's dinner was drawing to a close, and still he did not turn up, though they were all waiting, so that those on board the ship grew uneasy. The first comrade bent down to the earth and listened. Oh ho! So you are asleep beneath the mill, are you? Then the marksman seized his gun, shot into the mill, and awoke Swift of Foot with his shooting. Swift of Foot set off running, and in a moment he had brought the water. The Tsar had not yet risen from the table, and his command could not therefore have been more exactly fulfilled. But it was all to no purpose. Another task had to be imposed. The Tsar bade them say to the fool, Come now, as you are so smart, show what you're made of. You and your comrades must eat at one meal 20 roast oxen and 20 large measures of baked bread. The first comrade heard and told this to the fool. The fool was terrified and said, Why, I can't eat even one whole loaf at one meal. Don't be afraid, said Gobbler, that will be very little for me. The servant came and delivered the Tsar's command. Good, said the fool, let us have it and we'll eat it. And they brought 20 roasted bullocks and 20 measures of baked bread. Gobbler alone ate it all up. Ugh, he said, precious little, they might have given us a little more. The Tsar bade them to say to the fool that he must now drink 40 barrels of wine, each barrel holding 40 buckets. The first comrade of the fool heard these words and told them to him beforehand. The fool was horrified. Why, I could not drink a single bucketful, said he. Don't be frightened, said the drinker. I'll drink for all. It will be little enough for me. They poured out the 40 barrels of wine. The drinker came and drank the whole lot at one draught. He drank it right to the dregs and said, "Ugh, little enough too. I should have liked as much again." After that, the Tsar commanded the fool to get ready for his wedding and go to the bathroom to have a good wash. Now this bathroom was of cast iron, and the Tsar commanded that it should be heated hotter than hot, that the fool might be suffocated therein in a single instant. So they heated the bath red hot, the fool went to wash himself, and behind him came the mujik with the straw. "I must straw the floor," said he. They locked them both in the bathroom. The mujik scattered the straw, and it became so cold that the fool was scarce able to wash himself properly. The water in the bath froze so hard. He crept up on the stove, and there he passed the whole night. In the morning they opened the bath, and they found the fool alive and well, lying on the stove and singing songs. They brought word thereof to the Tsar. The Tsar was sore troubled, for he did not know how to rid himself of the fool. He thought, and commanded him to produce a whole army of his own devising. "How will a simple mujik be able to form an army?" thought he. "He will certainly not be able to do that." As soon as the fool heard of this, he was much alarmed. "Now I am quite lost," said he. "You have delivered me from my straits more than once, my friends, but it is plain that nothing can be done now." "You're a pretty fellow," said the man with the bundle of wood. "Why, you've clean forgotten me, haven't you?" The servant came and told the fool the Tsar's command. "If you will have the Tsarevna to wife, you must put on foot a whole army by morning." "Agreed. But if the Tsar even after this should refuse, I will conquer his whole Tsardom and take the Tsarevna by force." At night the fool's companion went out into the fields, took his bundle of wood and began scattering the faggots in different directions. And immediately a countless army appeared, both horse and foot. In the morning the Tsar saw it and was terrified in his turn, and in all haste he sent to the fool precious ornaments and raiment, and bade them lead him to court and marry him to the Tsarevna. The fool attired himself in these costly ornaments, and they made him look handsomer than words can tell. He appeared before the Tsar, wedded the Tsarevna, received a large wedding gift, and became quite clever and witty. The Tsar and Tsaritsa grew very fond of him, and the Tsarevna lived with him all her life and loved him as the apple of her eye. End of The Flying Ship. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. In a certain kingdom, in a certain empire, there once lived a Tsar. At his royal court there was a harness of golden rings. Now it fell out that this Tsar once dreamed that in this harness was fashioned a strange horse, not woolly white, but silvery bright, and on its brow a glistening moon. On awaking in the morning, the Tsar commanded the public crier to cry abroad that whoever would interpret this dream and discover this horse should have his daughter in exchange, and half his tsardom into the bargain. At this royal proclamation, a multitude of princes, boyars, and great lords came together, and thought, but not one of them could interpret the dream, not one of them could discover the horse. At last they hunted up a little withered old grey-beard muzhicek. Note, little peasant, but here gnome or goblin. End note. And he said to the Tsar, "Thy dream was not a dream, but real. On just such a horse as thou didst see in thy dream, there came to thee in the night the muzhicek as big as your thumb with mustaches 7 versts long, and he wants to steal away your lovely little daughter out of the strong fortress." "Oh, I thank thee, good man, for thy interpretation. And now wilt thou not tell me who can get me this horse?" "I will tell thee, my lord Tsar. I have 3 sons, mighty men of valor. My wife bore me all 3 of them in a single night, the eldest in the evening, the second at midnight, the third at dawn of day. So we call them Zorka, Vechorka, and Polunochka. Note, meaning the red dawn, evening, and midnight. They have not their equals in this realm for strength or valor. Look now, my little father and sovereign lord, send them forth that they may seek this strange horse for thee. Let them go, dear old friend. Let them take as much from my treasury as they need, nor will I go back from my royal word. Whichever of them brings me this horse, to him will I give the Tsarevna and half my tsardom." The next day, early in the morning, the three brother heroes, Zorka, Vecherka, and Polonochka, arrived at the Tsar's court. The first had the fairest face, the second the broadest shoulders, the third the stateliest figure. They went into the Tsar, prayed before the sacred icons, and bowed low on every side of them. But to the Tsar they bowed lowest of all. "May our sovereign lord and Tsar live long in the land. We have come to thee not to feast with the festive, but to do a deed right hard and sore. For we have come to fetch thee this strange horse from far away, that self-same horse that appeared to thee in thy dreams. Success attends you, ye good youths. What provision do you require for your journey? We want nothing, O Gosuddar." Note: Gosuddar means emperor. End note. "Only do not neglect our good father and mother. Provide for them in their old age and need. If that be all, depart in God's name on your journey. I will bring your old parents to my court, and they shall be my guests. And I will give them to eat and drink from my own royal table. They shall be clothed and shod from my own royal wardrobe, and they shall be filled full with all good things." So the good youths departed on their long journey. They traveled that day, and the next, and the third also, with nothing but the sky above their heads and the broad steppe on every side of them. At last they left the steppe and entered a dense forest, and rejoiced greatly. On the very skirts of the forest stood a little hut, and beside the little hut a tiny sheepfold full of sheep. "Look," said they, "there we shall find some place to lay our heads in and rest from our journey." They knocked at the hut. There was no answer. They peeped into it. It was quite empty. The brothers entered in, made ready for the night, prayed to God, and laid them down to sleep. In the morning, Zorka and Polonochka went into the wood to hunt, and said to Vecherka, "Stay at home and get dinner ready for us." The eldest brother agreed, put everything to rights in the hut, and then went to the sheepfold, chose the fattest ram, cut it up, cleansed it, and roasted it for dinner. He had no sooner laid the table, however, and had just sat down by the window to await his brothers, when all at once there came a rumbling and a thundering from the forest. The door was nearly torn off its hinges, and the muzhicek, only as big as your thumb but with mustaches 7 versts long, entered the hut with his mustaches floating far down his back. On entering the hut, he looked at Vecherka from beneath his beetling brows, and shrieked with a terrible voice, "How dare you come into my hut as if you were its lord and master? How dare you cut up my ram?" But Vecherka looked at him and smiled. "You ought to grow a little bigger before you shriek like that," said he. "Be off and don't let me see you here again, or I'll take a spoonful of cabbage soup and a little crumb of bread and glue up your eyes for you." The muzhicek, no bigger than your thumb but with mustaches 7 versts long, replied, "I see that you don't know that though small, I am brave withal." Then, tearing the hero from the bench, he dragged him from corner to corner, bumped his head well against the walls, and then threw him, more dead than alive, beneath the bench. He himself took the roast ram from the table, ate it bones and all, and vanished. The brothers returned and asked, "What's the matter? Why have you bandaged your head?" But Vecherka was ashamed to say that such a miserable little wretch had trounced him so soundly, and he said to his brothers, "I got a headache from looking to the fire without you, so that I could neither roast nor boil." The next day Zorka and Vecherka went out to hunt, and Polonochka stayed behind to get the dinner ready. No sooner had he finished cooking the dinner than there was again a rushing sound in the wood, and into the hut came the muzhicek no bigger than your thumb but with mustaches 7 versts long, knocked Polonochka about, maimed him, hurled him under the bench, ate up the whole dinner, and vanished. Again the brothers returned and asked, "What's the matter, brotherkin? Why do you tie up your head with rags?" "I've got a headache from looking to the fire, my brothers," replied Polonochka, "so that my poor little head was quite splitting, and therefore I could not get ready your dinner for you." On the third day the elder brothers went to hunt, and Zorka remained in the hut alone, and thought to himself, "There's something not quite right here. It is not for nothing that my brothers have complained of the heat of the fire 2 days running." So he began to look all about and to listen, in case anyone should be coming to fall upon him unawares. He chose a ram, killed and cut it up, cleansed it, roasted it, and placed it on the table. And immediately there was a racket and a thundering in the wood, and in at the door rushed the muzhik no bigger than your thumb, but with mustaches 7 versts long, with a rick of hay on his head, and in his hand a bucket of water. He put the bucket of water in the midst of the courtyard, strewed the hay all over the courtyard, and set about counting his sheep. He saw that there was yet another ram missing, flew into a violent rage, stamped on the ground with his little feet, dashed into the hut, and flung himself violently upon Zorka. But this Zorka was not like his brothers. He seized the muzhik by his mustaches and began to drag him about the hut and well handle him, and cried at the same time, "If you don't know the ford, don't step overboard." The muzhik no bigger than your thumb wriggled about from side to side, tore himself out of Zorka's iron grip, though he left the ends of his mustaches in his fists, and ran away from him as hard as he could, Zorka after him. But whither, pray? He flew up into the air like fluff, vanished from before his eyes, and was gone. Zorka returned to the hut and sat down by the window to await his beloved brothers. The brothers arrived and were quite astonished to find him hale and whole and the dinner ready. But Zorka drew out from his girdle the ends of the long mustaches which he had torn from the monster, and said to his brothers with a smile, "Look, my brothers, I have twisted your headache that you caught from the fire around my girdle. I see now that neither in strength nor stout-heartedness are ye fit comrades for me. So I will go on alone to discover the wondrous steed, but do you go back to the village and plough land." Then he took leave of his brothers and went on his way. Just as he was leaving the wood, Zorka came upon a crazy little hut. And in this crazy little hut, he heard someone crying dolorously, "Whoever will give me to eat and to drink, him will I serve." The good youth went into the hut and saw that on the stove lay an armless, legless one, piteously groaning and begging for meat and drink. Zorka gave him to eat and drink and asked him who he was. "A hero was I, no whit worse than thou, but lo, I ate one of the rams of the muzhik no bigger than your thumb, and he made me a cripple for the rest of my life. But because you have had compassion upon me and given me both to eat and to drink, I will show you how to get the wondrous horse." "Show me, I pray, good man." "Go then to the river hard by, take a ferry boat on it, ferry people across it the whole year round, take money from none, and you'll see what will happen." Zorka went to the river, took a ferry boat, and a whole year round he ferried everybody across gratis. And it befell him once that he had to ferry over 3 old pilgrims. The old men got out on the bank and began to undo their traveling purses, and the first pulled out a whole handful of gold, the second a whole roll of pure pearls, and the third the most precious stones. "There, that is for thy ferrying, good youth," said the old men. "I can take nothing from you," said Zorka, "because I am here, according to promise, to ferry everyone across without taking money for it." "Then for what dost thou do it?" "I seek the wondrous horse, which is not woolly white, but silvery bright, and I can find it nowhere. So that is why good people have advised me to hire a ferry boat here, and they said, 'You shall see what will happen.' Well, for thee, good youth, that thou hast been true to thy word, we can equip thee for thy journey. Here is a little ring for thy little finger. Do but transfer it from finger to finger, and all thy wishes will be gratified." And the old men went on their way, but Zorka immediately put the ring on the other hand and said, "Let me be at once in those places where the muzhik no bigger than your thumb lives and pastures his horse." And immediately the tempest took him, and before he could wink once he found himself in front of a deep chasm among the gloomy rocks, and he saw that in this side of the chasm, but on the very edge of it, was sitting the muzhik no bigger than your thumb, but with mustaches 7 versts long, and around him was pacing the wondrous horse that was not woolly white, but silvery bright. On its brow shone a moon, and many stars were in its mane. "Welcome, good youth," screeched the monster to Zorka. "What brings you hither?" "I am going to take your horse away from you." "Nay, 'tis not for you nor for anyone else to take him from me. If I but seize him by the mane and lead him to the edge of this abyss, nobody in the world can take him away hence, though they strive forever and ever." "Well then, let us exchange." "Willingly. I don't mind exchanging with you. You bring me hither the daughter of your Tsar, and I will give you my horse, and you may lead him from field to field." "Good," said Zorka, and he immediately began considering how he might get the better of the monster. He transferred his ring from finger to finger and said, "Let the lovely Tsarevna immediately appear here before me." And in the twinkling of an eye the Tsarevna appeared before him, all pale and trembling, and fell down on her knees before him, and begged and prayed him, "Good youth, wherefore hast thou conjured me away from my father? O spare my tender youth!" But Zorka whispered her, "I want to get the better of that monster there. I'll make believe to exchange you for the horse, and leave you with the monster as his wife. But you take this ring, and when you want to return home, you have only to take it off one finger and put it on the other and say, 'I want to turn into a little needle to stick into Zorka behind his collar,' and you'll see what will happen." And as Zorka had said to the Tsarevna, so it fell out. He gave the Tsarevna to the monster in exchange for the wondrous horse, put his martial harness on the horse, mounted, and went on his way. But the muzhicek no bigger than your thumb laughed and shouted after him, "'Tis well, good youth! Thou hast exchanged a lovely damsel for a horse." Zorka had not gone 2 or 3 versts when he felt something pricking him behind the collar. He put his hand there, and lo, there was a needle. He threw it on the ground, and before him stood a lovely damsel, who wept and begged him to take her back to her dear father's house. Zorka set her on the horse beside him, and galloped off as only heroes can gallop. He arrived at the Tsar's court, and found the Tsar in an evil mood. The Tsar said to him, "I rejoice not at all, good youth, in thy faithful service, nor do I require the steed thou hast gotten for me, nor will I reward thee with aught according to thy merits." "And wherefore, pray, dear father Tsar?" "Because, good youth, my daughter went away without my leave." "Nay, but my sovereign lord and Tsar, it beseems thee not to trifle with me so. The Tsarevna was only this instant greeting me from out of her stronghold." Then the Tsar rushed into the stronghold, where he still found his daughter, embraced her and brought her out to the good youth. "Here is thy reward and my delight." And the Tsar took the horse and gave his daughter to Zorka to wife, and half his tsardom along with her into the bargain. And Zorka still lives with his wife and cannot love her enough, and he rejoices in his good fortune without overmuch boasting. End of the muzhicek as big as your thumb, with mustaches 7 verses long. The story of the Tsarevich Ivan, and of the harp that harped without a harper. Far, far behind the blue sea, behind the fiery abyss and the void places, in the midst of the pleasant meadows stood a lofty city, and in this city ruled Tsar Umnaya Golova with his tsaritsa. There they lived a long time, and to their great delight a daughter was born to them, a most lovely Tsarevna whom they called Neotsianaya. And this next year there was born to them another daughter just as lovely, and her they named the Tsarevna Bestyanaya. In his joy, Tsar Umnaya Golova made merry and gladdened his heart, and feasted and ate and drank to his heart's content. He gave his voevods, or generals and high officials, 303 buckets of mead to toast him in, and bade them regale his whole realm with beer for 3 days. Whoever liked might drink, and good measure was meted out to him. Now, when all the feastings and junketings were over, Tsar Umnaya Golova began to be troubled with the thought how to feed and nourish and train up his beloved daughters, and bring them under the golden crown. Great were the cares of the Tsar concerning his daughters. They were only fed with gold spoons, they were laid to sleep on eider-down beds, they were covered with sable coverlets, and 3 nurses took it in turn to drive away the flies when the Tsarevnas laid them down to sleep. Tsar Umnaya Golova bade them watch over his daughters, and take care that the lovely sun never looked into their room with his bright rays, that the cold dew never fell on them, and that the truant wind never dared to blow upon them. And for the defense and protection of his daughters, the Tsar placed beside them 77 nurses and 77 guardians. A certain wise man advised him to do so. Thus, Tsar Umnaya Golova with his tsaritsa and his 2 daughters lived and thrived together. I know not how many years passed by, and the Tsarevnas began to grow up and become beautiful. Wooers already began to make their appearance at the Tsar's court, but Narodnuiya Russkiya was in no great haste to marry off his daughters. He reflected that a destined wooer cannot be avoided even on a swift horse, while a wooer that is not destined cannot be held fast by triple iron chains. And while he was thus thinking and casting the matter over in his mind, he suddenly heard a great noise and commotion. There was a scampering up and down and to and fro in his courtyard. The outdoor nurses were crying, the indoor nurses were wailing, and the guardians were shouting with all their might. Narodnuiya Russkiya immediately rushed out and asked, "What is the matter?" Then the 77 male attendants and the 77 female attendants all fell down on their knees before him. "We are guilty," they cried. "Look now, the Tsarevna Neotsyanaya and Bestyanaya have been carried off by a whirlwind." A strange thing had happened. The Tsarevnas had gone out to walk in the Tsar's garden to pluck a few sweet peas and pull off a red poppy or two and feast upon a few ripe pippins. Suddenly a black cloud rose up above them, whence it came nobody knew, blew right into the eyes of the nurses and guardians, and by the time they had come to themselves and begun to rub their eyes, all trace of the Tsarevnas had vanished. There was nothing for the eye to see or the ear to hear. Narodnuiya Russkiya was beside himself with rage. "I will deliver you all over to an evil death," cried he. "You shall perish miserably in dungeons. I will bid them shoot at you with peas in the gates." What? 77 of you nurses and 77 of you guardians could not look after two Tsarevnas? And now Narodnuiya Russkiya was in sore trouble and affliction. He neither ate nor drank nor slept. Everything was a grief and a burden to him. Banquets at his court there were none, and the sound of the fiddle and the shawm was heard there no more. Only sad grief sat beside him and sang her mournful dirge like the croaking of a crow of evil omen. But time passes and sorrow with it. The life of man is like a variegated tapestry, interwoven with dark flowers and bright. Time moved onward, and then another child was born to the Tsar, but this time it was not a Tsarevna, but a Tsarevich. Narodnuiya Russkiya rejoiced greatly. He called his son Ivan and placed beside him old men nurses, foster fathers, wise teachers, and valiant voivodes. And the Tsarevich Ivan began to grow and grow, just as wheaten meal swells and swells when good yeast is put to it. He grew not by the day, but by the hour. And what wondrous beauty, what a stately figure was his! One thing only weighed upon the heart of Narodnuiya Russkiya. Good and beauteous was the Tsarevich Ivan, but there was nothing in him of heroic valor or of knightly skill. He did not tear off the heads of his comrades, nor break their arms and legs. He neither loved to play with lances of damask steel, nor with swords of tempered metal. He did not muster his strong battalions, nor hold converse with his voivodes. Good and beauteous was the Tsarevich Ivan. He amazed all men with his wit and wisdom, and his sole delight was to play on the harp that needed no harper. And the Tsarevich Ivan played so that men forgot all else as they listened. The moment he placed his fingers on the strings, they sang and played with such a wondrous voice that the very dumb wept for sympathy, and the very legless danced for joy. Beautiful songs they were, but they did not replenish the Tsar's treasure, nor defend the realm, nor smite the evil foe. And one day Narodnuiya Russkiya bade them bring the Tsarevich Ivan before him, and thus he spake to him: "My beloved son, good art thou and beauteous, and I am well content with thee. One thing only grieves me. I do not see in thee the valor of a warrior or the skill of a champion. Thou dost not love the clash of steel lances, and the tempered blade has no charm for thee. Look now, I am growing old, and we have savage foes. They will come to us, make our realm the spoil of war, put to death our boyars and voivodes, and lead captive me and my Tsaritsa, for thou canst not defend us." The Tsarevich Ivan listened to the words of Narodnuiya Russkiya, and thus he made answer: "Dear Tsar Gosudar and father, not by strength but by craft are cities taken. Not by cudgels but by cunning will I prevail against the foe. Make trial of my martial strength, make trial of my youthful valor. Look now, They tell me that I had 2 sisters, Tsarevnas, and that the truant whirlwind carried them away, and that the rumor of them vanished as if it were covered with snow. Call together now all thy princes, thy heroes, thy stalwart voevods, and bid them do thee the service of finding out my sisters, the Tsarevnas. Let them bring their damask blades, their iron lances, their glowing darts, and their countless soldiery. And if any one of them shall do thee this service, give to him my tsardom, and bid me be unto him as a scullion, to lick his pots, and as a fool, to make him sport. But if they cannot render thee this service, then I will render it thee. And then thou shalt see that my wisdom and my wit is sharper than a damask blade and stronger than a lance of steel. And the words of the Tsarevich pleased the Tsar. He called together his boyars, his voevods, his strong and mighty champions, and he said to them, "Is there any one of you, my boyars, voevods, strong and mighty champions, hero enough to go seek my daughters? If so, to him will I give to choose which of my daughters he will to be his love, and with her he shall have half my tsardom." The boyars, the voevods, and the champions looked one upon another and hid one behind the other, but not one of them dared to speak. Then the Tsarevich Ivan bowed low before his father and said, "Dear father, Gosudar, if none will take it upon him to render thee this paltry little service, give me thy blessing on my journey. I will go, I will seek my sisters, nor have I need of any royal gift from thee to enable me to do it." "Good," replied Tsar Unayagolova, "my blessing go with thee. Take also of my treasures, silver and gold and precious stones, and if thou requirest soldiers, take 100,000 horse and 100,000 foot also." And the Tsarevich Ivan replied, "I need neither silver nor gold, neither horse nor foot, neither the horse of the champion nor his sword and lance. I will take with me my sweet-sounding harp that plays of its own accord and nothing else. And thou, my sovereign Tsar, await me these 3 years, and if I come not again in the 4th year, then choose thee my successor." Then the Tsarevich Ivan received his father's blessing, both in writing and by word of mouth, commended himself to God, took his harp under his arm, and went straight on his way, whither his eyes led him. Whither was he to go to find his sisters? He went and went, near and far, high and low. The tale of his going is soon told, but the deed that he did is not soon done. The Tsarevich Ivan went straight onward. He went on, and as he went, he played songs upon his harp. Whenever the morning broke, he arose again and wended his way along. When night fell, he laid him down on the silky grass beneath the vast roof of the heavenly dome bright with stars. And at last he came to a dense forest. The Tsarevich Ivan heard a great cracking in this dense forest, as if someone were smashing it. Such a rumbling and a thundering was there in this forest. "What is this?" thought the Tsarevich Ivan. "A man must die once, though no man can die twice." And his eyes filled with terror, for he saw 2 wood demons fighting. One was belaboring the other with an uprooted oak, and the other was assailing his comrade with a pine tree 5 fathoms long, and the 2 of them were fighting with all their devilish strength. The Tsarevich Ivan approached them with his harp and struck up a dance. The demons stopped short, began to dance some devilish dance, and capered so wildly and with such vigor that the very welkin rang. They danced and they danced themselves off their legs and rolled onto the ground, and the Tsarevich Ivan began to talk to them. "Come now, what are ye quarreling for?" said he. "Ye, my children, are regular wood demons, and yet ye make fools of yourselves as if ye were common people." Then one of the wood demons said to him, "Wherefore should we not fight? Hearken and judge betwixt us. We were going on our way, and we found something. I said, 'Tis mine,' but he said, 'Tis mine.' We tried to divide it, and we could not divide it." "And what then was it that you found?" asked the Tsarevich Ivan. "This is what it was: a little bread and salt tablecloth, self-moving boots, and an invisible little cap. Dost thou want to eat and drink? Then spread out the little tablecloth, and 12 youths and 12 maids will bring thee mead to drink and sweetmeats as much as thou wilt. And if anyone come that way, thou hast only to slip on the self-walking boots, and thou canst go 7 versts at one stride. Nay, thou canst go even quicker than 14 versts at one stride, so that no bird can fly level with thee, and no wind can overtake thee. But if some unavoidable calamity threaten thee, thou hast but to put on thy little invisible cap, and thou vanishest so completely that the very dogs cannot scent out thy whereabouts. What a thing to quarrel about! Will ye agree to what I say if I divide what ye have found?" The wood demons agreed, and the Tsarevich Ivan said, "Look now, run toward that little path, and whichever of you reaches it, he shall have the tablecloth, the boots, and the cap." "Ah now," cried the wood demons, "that is common sense. Do thou hold the treasures, and we will do the running." So away they went at full tilt, till nothing but their heels were visible, and they disappeared in the forest. But the Tsarevich Ivan did not wait for them. He put the boots on his feet, the cap on his head, the little tablecloth under his arm, and made himself scarce, as they say. The wood demons came running back, but could not find the place where the Tsarevich had stood. But Ivan the Tsarevich, striding with great strides, got out of the wood and saw the wood demons running round him and beyond him, and trying to scent him out, but they could find nothing, and fell to wringing their hands. Ivan the Tsarevich went on his way. He went on and on, he strode and strode, and he came to the open plains. 3 roads lay before him, and in the crossway stood a wretched little hut turning round and round on hen's legs. And Ivan the Tsarevich cried to it, "Izbushka! Izbushka!" or wretched little hut. "Turn your back to the wood and your front to me." Then Ivan the Tsarevich stepped into the hut, and there in the hut was sitting Baba Yaga Bonyleg. "Fie, fie, fie," said Baba Yaga. "Up to this day a Russian soul has been a sight unknown to my eyes, and a sound unknown to my ears. And now a Russian soul appears before my very eyes. For what hast thou come, good youth?" "Oh, thou senseless granny," said the Tsarevich Ivan to her, "thou shouldst feed me well first, and only after that shouldst thou begin to ask questions." Baba Yaga leaped up in the twinkling of an eye, heated her little stove, fed Ivan the Tsarevich, and then began to ask him, "Whither dost thou go, good youth, and whither does thy way lie?" "I go," said Ivan the Tsarevich, "to seek my sisters, the Tsarevna Nielsenaya and the Tsarevna Bestyanaya. But now, dear little granny, tell me, if thou knowest, what way must I go, and where shall I find them?" "I know where the Tsarevna Nielsenaya lives," said Baba Yaga. "Thou must take the middle road to get to her. But she lives in the white stone palace of her old husband, the forest monster. The road thither is hard, far must thou go. And if thou gettest there, 'twill boot thee little, for the forest monster will devour thee." "Well, little granny, perhaps it will choke him. A Russian man is a bony morsel, and God will not give him over to be eaten by a brute like that. Farewell, and thank you for your bread and salt." And so the Tsarevich Ivan strode away from her, and look, there, right across the plain, shone white and dazzling the stony palace of the forest monster. Ivan went up to it and saw the gate, and on the gate sat a sort of little devil who cried, "No admittance!" "Open, my friend," replied Ivan the Tsarevich, "and I'll give thee some vodka." The little devil took the vodka, but he did not open the gate for all that. Then Ivan the Tsarevich went round about the palace and resolved to climb over the wall. He climbed up and along and never observed the trap into which he was falling, for on the top of the walls wires were spread all about, and the moment the Tsarevich Ivan touched one of these wires with his foot, all the bells fell a-ringing. Ivan the Tsarevich looked, and out upon the balcony rushed his sister, the Tsarevna Nielsenaya, and said, "Is it thou then that hast come, my beloved brother, Ivan the Tsarevich?" And the brother and the sister embraced and kissed each other. "Where shall I hide thee from the monster of the forest?" said the Tsarevna Nielsenaya. "For I believe he will be here at once." "Where indeed, for I am no needle." The brother and sister were still talking when suddenly there was the dull roar of a tempest and whirlwind. All the palace trembled, and the monster of the forest appeared. But Ivan the Tsarevich put on his little invisible cap and became invisible. And the forest monster said, "Where then is thy guest who climbed over the wall?" "I have no guest here at all," replied the Tsarevna Nielsenaya, "but perhaps the sparrows have been flying over it and struck it with their wings." "Sparrows indeed! Methinks I smell the smell of a Russian soul here." "What are you dreaming about? You run about the wide world and do nothing but harass souls, and now you would vex other souls also." "Don't be angry, Tsarevna Nielsenaya. I do no harm to thy happiness, only I have now a desire to eat." "And I should like to eat up this unknown," said the forest monster. Ivan the Tsarevitch, however, took off his invisible cap, bowed to the forest monster, and said, "Why do you want to eat me? See what a lean and bony morsel I am. Rather, let me regale you with a breakfast such as you have never eaten since the day of your birth. Only take care that you don't swallow your tongue and all." Then Ivan the Tsarevitch spread out his little bread and salt tablecloth. The 12 youths and the 12 damsels appeared and began to regale the forest monster with as much as ever he could eat. The forest monster ate and ate and ate, then he drank, and then he ate again, till he was unable to stir from the spot. He fell asleep in the very place where he sat. "And now farewell, my beloved sister," said the Tsarevitch Ivan. "Yet tell me, dost thou not know the place where our sister the Tsarevna Bestyanaya dwells?" "I know it," replied the Tsarevna Neostyanaya. "Thou must go to her along the great sea ocean. There she dwells in the very whirlpool of the ocean with her old husband, the sea monster. But the way thither is hard. Far, very far must thou swim, and if thou gettest there, it will boot thee little, for he will devour thee." "Well," said the Tsarevitch Ivan, "he may chew me perhaps, but he will find me a hard morsel to swallow. Farewell, sister." And Ivan the Tsarevitch began to stride onward, and he came to the great sea ocean. By the shore stood a boat such as the Russian people use when they go a-fishing. The shrouds and gear were of linden bast, the sails of fine hair, mats, and the boat itself was not welded with nails, but sewn fast with birch bark. On this ship, the mariners were getting ready to go to sea, to sail to the rock-salt island. "Won't you take me with you?" said the Tsarevitch Ivan. "I will pay you nothing for my passage, but I will tell you tales so that you will never notice how long the journey is." The shipfolk agreed, and they sailed away upon the great sea ocean. They sailed past the rock-salt island, the Tsarevitch Ivan told them tales, and they sailed and sailed. Suddenly, whence they knew not, a tempest came flying up, the thunder began to growl, and the ship began to quake. "Alas!" shrieked the shipsfolk, "to our own destruction have we listened to this fair speaker. Never shall we see our dear little homes again. We shall descend into the whirlpools of ocean. There is no help for it. We must pay tribute to the monster of the sea. Let us cast lots, it will fall upon the guilty." They cast lots, and it fell upon the Tsarevitch Ivan. "It can't be helped, my brother," said the Tsarevitch Ivan. "I thank you for your bread and salt. Farewell, nor think amiss of me in time to come." Then he took with him his self-walking boots, his little bread and salt tablecloth, his little invisible cap, and his harp that harped of its own accord, and they raised the good youth and swung him out into the whirlpools of ocean. The sea became calm, the boat sped on, and the Tsarevitch Ivan went like a key to the bottom, and stood upright on his legs in the halls of the monster of the sea, the wondrous flower-grown halls of ocean. The sea monster was sitting on his throne, with the Tsarevna Bestyanaya by his side, and the sea monster said, "'Tis a long time since I have eaten fresh flesh, and lo, it comes right into my very hands. Welcome, friend. Come here and let me see at which end of you I may begin." Then the Tsarevitch Ivan began to say that he was the brother of the Tsarevna Bestyanaya, and that among good people one behaved not so badly as to eat another up. "Oh, that is too much," shrieked the sea monster. "He comes to force his own rules and regulations upon the homes of other people?" Ivan the Tsarevitch saw that things were going badly, so he took out his harp that played of its own accord, and when he began playing a plaintive air, the sea monster began to pull wry faces, then fell to sighing like a blacksmith's bellow, and wept and moaned just as if he had swallowed a needle. And then, when the Tsarevitch Ivan struck up the air, "Let the merry churochki go round the little table," why then indeed the very halls put their arms akimbo and fell a-dancing, while the sea monster could not skip up and down enough, but stamped with his feet, snapped with his fingers, rolled his eyes about, and pulled such faces that all the fishes flocked round to see, and nearly died for laughter. The monster of the sea thoroughly enjoyed himself. "Well," said he, "'twould be a sin to eat such a youth. Stop here, stay with us, sit down and be our guest, won't you? Here are lots of herrings, pike, bream, and perch. Come, sit down at table, eat, drink, and be merry, my dear guest." So Ivan the Tsarevitch and the Tsarevna Bestyanaya and the sea monster sat down, and ate and drank and made merry. A whale danced a German dance in front of them, the herrings sang glees, the carp performed on various instruments. After dinner the sea monster went to sleep, and the Tsarevna Betyanaya said, "My beloved brother, I am glad to see thee, dear guest. So far well, but 'twill not last forever. When he awakes, the sea monster will eat thee if the evil humor takes him." "Tell me, darling sister," said the Tsarevich Ivan, "how I may save our sister Neotstianaya from the forest monster and thee from the monster of the sea." "If you like, you may try your luck, but you'll find it, I think, a difficult business. Behind the great sea ocean here lies a large tsardom, and there reigns there not a tsar, but a tsaritsa called the Tsar Maiden. If thou make thy way thither, and gettest into her fenced garden, then the Tsar Maiden will become thy consort, and she only can free us and restore us to our father and mother. But the mischief of it is this: she has a strict guard which will allow no one to cross the shore, a guard all bristling with guns and lances, and fastened to each lance is a head, and all these poor little heads are the heads of the youths who come to woo the Tsar Maiden. There were tsars, tsareviches, kings' sons, mightily strong warriors, and they came with hosts, and they sailed with ships, and were able to do nothing. Their heads were stuck upon lances." "Look now," said the Tsarevich Ivan, "what is there to fear? Terrible are the threats of heaven, and manifold is the mercy of God. Tell me but how I may get to the tsardom of the Tsar Maiden." "But is it a wise thing to make thy way thither? Nevertheless I'll give thee my beloved sturgeon. Sit upon him and go thy way, and my swift runner the long-nosed sterlet shall swim before thee to show the way." The brother and sister then said farewell. The Tsarevich Ivan sat him on the sturgeon and sped away, and the sterlet went on before to show the way. They fell in with some crabs, and they saluted the Tsarevich Ivan with their mustaches, and beat the drums with their clippers, and drove the little fishes out of their path. But the sea is not the same thing as the dry land. There was neither hemp nor bramble to hold on by. The way was slippery as grease. The Tsarevich Ivan slipped and slipped. Then he put on his little invisible cap, and saw that the guards of the Tsar Maiden were opening wide their eyes and gazing afar off, and saw nothing that was going on beneath their noses. And they were still whetting their swords and sharpening their spears. And the Tsarevich Ivan came to the shore, the sturgeon set him safely on the quay, made an obeisance, and jumped into the water again. But the Tsarevich Ivan went past the guard without bending his knee, and entered the fenced garden as if he were the master there. He walked about, he walked all over it, he diverted himself and ate of the luscious and transparent apples there. And lo, the Tsarevich lingered and lingered there, and he saw 20 white doves flying toward a pond. They lighted on the ground and became 20 maidens, lovely as the stars of heaven, and as goodly as blood and milk. Among them the Tsar Maiden was walking like a peacock, and said, "My beloved friends, 'tis hot. Ye see how the sun burns like an oven. Let us bathe. No evil eye can see us here. So strong a guard stands on the shore that not even a fly could pass by them." "A fly cannot pass by them, eh? Look now what a big fly has passed them," said the Tsarevich Ivan, and he took off his little invisible cap and bowed low to the Tsar Maiden. The Tsar Maiden and her comrades, as maidens are wont to do, shrieked and moaned, thought of running away and didn't, made as though they wouldn't look and looked all the same, and winked and blinked with their eyes. "Tsar Maiden, and ye lovely damsels," said the Tsarevich Ivan, "wherefore do ye fear me? I am not a bear, I shall not bite you. I will take no one's heart against her will. But if my destined bride be here, then am I her destined bridegroom." Then the Tsar Maiden turned as scarlet as the red poppy flower, gave her white hand to the Tsarevich Ivan, and said, "Welcome, good youth. Whether thou be Tsar or Tsarevich, king or king's son, I know not. But if thou hast come hither as a gentle guest, thy reception shall be as beseemeth a dear friend. Many brutal wooers have come to me, who would have taken my virginal heart by force, such a thing as was never heard of since the beginning of the world. Come into my white stone halls and into my crystal chambers." The whole nation heard that their Tsarevna, the Tsar maiden, had got her a bridegroom after her own heart, and they came in swarms, both of young and old, and shouted and rejoiced with all their might. And the Tsar maiden commanded that the royal cellar should be opened for them, and that they should be allowed to beat drums and guitars and play fiddles. And the next day they played at the merry banquet and the wedding feast. And there were banquets for 3 days and rejoicings for 3 weeks. And after that the Tsarevich Ivan spoke to his consort about releasing his sisters, one from the monster of the forest and the other from the monster of the sea. "My beloved consort, Ivan the Tsarevich," she replied, "what would I not do for thee? Send and fetch me my hedgehog lawyer and my sparrow scribe, and let them send you cases to the monster of the forest and the monster of the sea, bidding them give up the sisters of Ivan the Tsarevich, or I will take them into custody and give them over to a cruel death." So the hedgehog lawyer and the sparrow scribe wrote out ukases and sent them off. And the monster of the forest and the monster of the sea could do nothing. So they set free the Tsarevna Neotsianaya and the Tsarevna Bestianaya. And the Tsarevich Ivan wrote this letter to his father, the Tsar Umnaya Golova. "Thou seest, O sovereign Tsar, that not with strength and valor only, but with craft and wit also can one prevail over all. And the self-playing harp is sometimes of as good service as a Damascus blade, although of course one must not lash it with a whip. And now come to me, dear father, and be my guest, and I will be with thee with my wife and my sisters. A goodly banquet is ready, and I wish thee long years and many." And so Ivan the Tsarevich lived a joyous life, and waxed rich and prosperous. And he lived long and reigned gloriously, and feasted me right royally. So I made up this merry tale about him. End of the story of the Tsarevich Ivan and of the harp that harped without a harper. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. The story of Gore Gorinskoye, which means woeful woe. There once lived in a village 2 brothers, one of whom was rich and the other poor. With the rich man everything went swimmingly, in everything he laid his hand to he found luck and bliss. But as for the poor man, slave and toil as he might, fortune flew away from him. The rich man, in a few years, so grew out of bounds that he went to live in the town, and built him the biggest house there and settled down as a merchant. But the poor man got into such straits that sometimes he had not even a crust of bread in the house to feed a whole armful of children, small, smaller, smallest, who all cried together and begged for something to eat and drink. And the poor man began to repine at his fate. He began to lose heart, and his disheveled head began to sink deeper between his shoulders. And he went to his rich brother in the town and said, "Help me, I am quite worn out." "Why should I not?" replied the rich man. "We can well afford it, only you must come and work it out with me all this week." "Willingly," said the poor man. So he set to work, swept out the yard, curried the horses, and split up firewood. At the end of the week, the rich brother gave him a grizenka in money and a large lump of bread. "Thanks even for that," said the poor man, and was about to turn away homeward, when his brother's conscience evidently pricked him, and he said, "Why dost thou slip off like that? Tomorrow is my name day, stay and feast with us." And the poor man stayed to his brother's banquet. But unfortunately for him, a great many rich guests assembled at his brother's, men of renown. And these guests his brother served most zealously, bowing down low before them, and imploring them as a favor to be so good as to eat and drink their fill. But he forgot altogether about his poor brother, who could only look on from afar and see all the good people eating and drinking and enjoying themselves and making merry. At last the banquet was over, the guests arose, they began to thank the host and hostess, and the poor man also bowed to his very girdle. The guests also went home, and very merry they all were. They laughed and joked and sang songs all the way. And the poor man went home as hungry as ever, and he thought to himself, "Come now, I will sing a song too, so that people may think that I too was not overlooked or passed over on my brother's name day, but ate to surfeit, and drank with the best of them." And so the peasant began singing a song, but suddenly his voice died away. He heard quite plainly that someone behind his back was imitating his song in a thin piping voice. He stopped short, and the voice stopped short. He went on singing, and again the voice imitated him. "Who is that singing? Come forth!" shrieked the poor man. And he saw before him a monster, shriveled up and yellow, with scarcely any life in it, huddled in rags and girded about with the same vile rags, and its feet wound round with linden bast. The peasant was quite petrified with horror, and he said to the monster, "Who art thou?" "I am Goragorenskoye. I have compassion on thee. I will help thee to sing." "Well, Gora, let us go together through the wide world arm in arm. I see that I shall find no other friends and kinsmen there." "Let us go then, master. I will never desert thee." "And on what shall we go then?" "I know not what you are going upon, but I will go upon you." And flop, in an instant he was on the peasant's shoulders. The peasant had not strength enough to shake him off, and so the peasant went on his way, carrying woeful woe on his shoulders, though he was scarce able to drag one leg after the other, and the monster was singing all the time and beating time to it and driving him along with his little stick. "I say, master, wouldst thou like me to teach thee my favorite song? I am Woe the woefully woeful, girt about with linden bast rags, shod with beggars' buskins, bark stripped. Live with me then, live with woe, and sorrow never know. If you say you have no money, you can always raise it, honey, yet provide a hard-won penny 'gainst the day thou'll not have any. And besides," added Woe, "thou already hast this penny against an evil day, besides a crust of bread. Let us then go on our way, and drink and be merry." So they went on, and drank, and so they got home. There sat the wife and all the children without food, weeping, but Woe set the peasant a-dancing. On the following day, Woe began to sigh, and said, "My head aches from drinking." And again he called upon the master to drink a thimbleful. "I have no money," said the peasant, "but didn't I tell thee thou canst always raise it, honey? Pawn thy harrow and plough, sledge and cart, and let us drink. We'll have a rare time of it today at any rate." What could he do? The peasant could not rid himself of Woe, so painfully tight did he sit upon him by this time. So he let himself be dragged about by Woe, and drank and idled away the whole day. And on the next day Woe groaned still more, and even began howling, and said, "Come, let us saunter about, let us drink away everything and pawn it. Sell thyself into slavery, and so get money to drink with." The peasant saw that ruin was approaching him, so he had resort to subtlety, and he said to woeful Woe, "I have heard our old men say that a treasure was buried about here a long time ago, but it was buried beneath such heavy stones that my single strength would be quite unable to raise it. Now, if only we could raise this treasure, darling little Woe, what a fine time of idling and drinking we should have together. Come then, and let us raise it. Woe has strength enough for everything." So they went all about the place, and they came to a very large and heavy stone. 5 peasants together could not have moved it from the spot, but our friend and Woe lifted it up at the first effort. And lo, beneath the stone there was indeed a coffer, dark and heavy, and at the very bottom of this coffer something was sparkling. And the peasant said to Woe, "You just creep into the coffer and get out the gold, and I'll stand here and hold up the stone." So Woe crept into the coffer with great glee and cried out, "Hi, master, here are riches incalculable, 20 jars brimful of gold, all standing one beside the other." And he handed up to the peasant one of the jars. The peasant took the jar into his lap, and as at the same time he let the stone fall back into its old place, he shut up woeful Woe in the coffer with all the gold. "Perish thou and thy riches with thee," thought the peasant. "No good luck goes along with thee." And he went home to his own, and with the money he got from the jar he bought wood, repaired his cottage, added livestock to his possessions, and worked harder than ever, and he began to engage in trade, and it went well with him. In a single year he grew so much richer that in place of his hut he built him a large wooden house. He then went to town to invite his brother and his wife to the housewarming. "What are you thinking of?" said his rich brother with a scornful smile. "A little while ago you were naked and had nothing to eat, and now you are giving housewarmings and laying out banquets." "Well, at one time certainly I had nothing to eat, but now, thank God, I am no worse off than you. Come and see." The next day the rich brother went out into the country to his poor brother, and there on the pebbly plain he saw wooden buildings all new and lofty, such as not every town merchant can boast of. And the poor brother who dwelt on the pebbles fed the rich brother till he could eat no more, and made him drink his fill. And after that, when the strings of his tongue were loosened, he made a clean breast of it, and told his brother how he had grown so rich. Envy overcame the rich brother. He thought to himself, this brother of mine is a fool. Out of 20 kegs he only took 1. With all that money, woe itself is not terrible. I'll go there myself. I'll take away the stone, take the money, and let woe out from beneath the stone. Let him hound my brother to death if he likes. No sooner said than done. The rich man took leave of his brother, but instead of going home, he went to the stone. He pulled and tugged at it, and managed at last to push it a little to one side, so as to be able to peep into the coffer. But before he could pull his head back again, woe had already skipped out and was sitting on his neck. Our rich man felt the grievous burden on his shoulders, looked round and saw the frightful monster bestriding him. And woe shrieked in his ear, "A pretty fellow you are! You wanted to starve me to death in there, did you? You shall not shake me off again in a hurry, I warrant you. I'll never leave you again." "Oh, senseless woe," cried the rich man. "Indeed, 'twas not I who placed you beneath that stone, and 'tis not I, the rich man, to whom you should cleave. Go hence and torment my brother." But woeful woe would not listen to him. "No," it screeched, "you lie. You deceived me once, but you shan't do it a second time." And so the rich man carried woe home with him, and all his wealth turned to dust and ashes. But the poor brother now lives in peace and plenty, and sings jesting ditties of woe the outwitted. End of the story of Gore Gorenskoye. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Go I know not whither, fetch I know not what. By the blue sea, in a certain empire, there dwelt once upon a time a king who was a bachelor, and he had a whole company of archers, and the archers used to go a-hunting with him, and shoot the birds that flew about, and provided meat for their master's table. In this company served a youthful archer named Fedot. A clever marksman was he, never missing his aim, wherefore the king loved him better than all his comrades. One day he chanced to go a-hunting very early, even at break of day. He went into a dense, drear forest, and there he saw a dove sitting on a tree. Fedot stretched his bow, took aim, loosed, and broke one of the dove's little wings, and the bird fell from the tree down upon the damp earth. The marksman picked it up, and was about to twist its neck and put it in his pouch, when the dove thus spoke to him. "Alas, young marksman, do not twist my poor little silly neck. Drive me not out of the white world. 'Twere better to take me alive, carry me home, put me in thy little window, and lo, the moment that slumber comes over me, at that very moment, I say, stroke me the wrong way down with thy right hand, and great good fortune shall be thine." The marksman was much amazed. "Why, what is this?" thought he. "Mine eyes tell me 'tis a bird, and naught else, yet it speaks with a human voice. Such a thing has never happened to me before." So he took the bird home, placed it in the windowsill, and waited and waited. 'Twas not very long before the bird laid its head beneath its wing and began to doze. Then the marksman raised his right hand and stroked it quite lightly, the wrong side down. The dove instantly fell to the ground and became a maiden soul, and so beautiful that the like of it can only be told in tales, but is neither to be imagined nor guessed at. And she spoke to the good youth who was the royal archer and said, "Thou hast had wit enough to win me, have also wit enough to live with me. Thou art my predestined husband, I am thy preordained wife." They were immediately of one mind. Fedot married, lived at home, and rejoiced in his young wife, yet forgot not his service either. Every morning before break of day he took his weapon, went into the forest, shot various kinds of wild beasts, and took them to the royal kitchen. But it was plain that his wife was much tormented by these hunting expeditions, and one day she said to him, "Listen, my friend, I am fearful for thee. Every day thou dost cast thyself into the forest, dost wander through fen and morass, and returnest home wet through and through, and we are none the better for it. What sort of a trade dost thou call this? Look now, I have a plan whereby thou also shalt profit by it. Get me now 100 or 2 of roubles, and I'll manage all the rest." Then Fedot hastened to his comrades and borrowed a rouble from one and 2 roubles from another, till he had collected about 200 roubles. These then he brought to his wife. "Now," said she, "buy me various kinds of silk with all this money." The archer went and bought various kinds of silk with the 200 roubles. She took them and said, "Be not sorrowful. Pray God and lay thee down to sleep. The morning is wiser than the evening." So the husband fell asleep, and the wife went out upon the balcony and opened her book of spells, and immediately 2 invisible youths appeared before her and said, "What art thou pleased to command? Take this silk, and in a single hour weave me a carpet more wondrous than anything to be found in the wide world, and let the whole kingdom be embroidered on this carpet, with all its cities and villages and rivers and lakes." Then they set to work and wove the carpet, and it was wondrous to behold, wondrous above everything. In the morning the wife handed the carpet to her husband. "There," said she, "take it to the marketplace and sell it to the merchants. But look now, haggle not about the price, but take whatever they offer thee for it." Fedot took the carpet, turned it round, hung it over his arm, and went to the marketplace. A merchant saw him, ran up to him at once, and said to him, "Hearken to me, honored sir. Wilt thou not sell me that carpet?" "Willingly." "And what then is the price?" "Thou art a frequenter of the marts, therefore will I leave the price to thee." The merchant fell a-thinking and a-thinking, but could not price the carpet. He was at his wit's end. Another merchant came running up, and after him a third and a fourth, till a great crowd of them collected. They looked at the carpet, marveled at it, and could not fix the price. At that moment the royal steward passed by that way, saw the crowd, and wanted to know what all the merchants were talking about. So he went up to them and said, "What is the matter?" "We cannot price this carpet," said they. The steward looked at the carpet, and he also was amazed. "Hearken, archer," said he, "tell me the real truth. Where didst thou get this lordly carpet?" "My wife wrought it." "How much dost thou want for it?" "I myself know not the value of it. My wife bade me not to haggle over it, but to take whatever was offered." "Then what dost thou say to 10,000 roubles?" The archer took the money and gave up the carpet. Now this steward was always by the king, and ate and drank at his table. So he went to dine with the king now also, and took the carpet with him. "Would it please your majesty to look at the carpet I have bought today?" The king looked, and saw there his whole realm, just as if it were on the palm of his hand, and he heaved a great sigh. "Why, what a carpet is this! In all my life I have never seen such cunning craft. Say now, what wilt thou take for this carpet?" And the king drew out 25,000 roubles, and gave them into the hand of the steward, but the carpet they hung up in the palace. "That is a mere nothing," thought the steward. "I will do better out of the second chance." So he immediately went in search of the archer, found out his little hut, entered the dwelling room, and the moment he saw the archer's wife, at that very instant he forgot all about himself and the errand on which he had come. Nevertheless the steward manned himself with a great effort, and turned sullenly homeward. Henceforth he bungled over everything he took in hand, and whether asleep or awake, he thought only of one thing, the wonderfully lovely little archeress. The king observed the change in him and asked him, "What ails thee? Has any great grief befallen thee?" "Alas, my king and father, I have seen the wife of the archer, such a beauty the world knows not of, nor has ever seen." The king himself was seized with a desire to fall in love with her, and he also went to the abode of the archer. He entered the living room and saw before him a lady of a loveliness unspeakable. Love's burning chilblain oppressed his heart. "Why should I remain a bachelor any longer?" thought he. "Lo now, I'll marry this beauty. She's too good for a mere archer. From her appearance she was evidently meant to be a queen." The king returned to his palace and said to the steward, "Hearken, thou hast had wit enough to show me the archer's wife, that unspeakable beauty. Thou must now have wit enough to remove the husband out of the way. I want to marry her myself, and if thou dost not remove him, look to thyself. Although thou art my faithful servant, thou shalt be hanged upon a gallows." Then the steward went about much more afflicted than before, and think as he would, he could not devise a method of getting rid of the archer. He wandered about the broad marketplaces and the narrow lanes, and there met him one day a miserable old hag. "Stay, thou king's servant," cried she. "I can see all thy thoughts. Thou wantest help against thy unavoidable woe." "Ah, help me, dear little granny. I'll pay thee what thou wilt." "Thou hast received the royal command to get rid of Fedot the archer. The thing is not so very easy. He indeed is simple, but his wife is subtle and cunning. Well now, we'll hit upon an errand which will not be accomplished so speedily. Go to the king and say that he must command the archer to go I know not whither and fetch I know not what. Such a task as that he'll never accomplish, though he live forever and ever. Either he will vanish out of knowledge altogether, or if he does come back, it will be without arms or legs." The steward rewarded the old hag with gold and hastened back to the king. And the king sent and commanded the archer to be brought before him. "Well, Fedot, thou art my young warrior and the first in my corps of archers. Render me then this service: go I know not whither, and fetch me I know not what. And mark me, if thou bring it me not back, 'tis I, the king, who say it to thee, thy head shall be severed from thy shoulders." The archer turned to the left, quitted the palace, and came home very sad and thoughtful. And his wife asked him, "Why art thou so sorrowful, darling? Has any misfortune befallen thee?" "The king has sent me I know not whither to fetch I know not what. 'Tis through thy beauty that this ruin has come upon us." "Yes, indeed, this service is no light one. It takes 9 years to get there and 9 years to get back again, 18 years in all, and God only knows if it can be managed even then. What's to be done then, and what will become of me? Pray God and lie down to sleep. The morning is wiser than the evening. Tomorrow thou wilt know all." The archer lay down to sleep, and his wife sat watching till midnight, opened her book of spells, and the 2 youths immediately appeared before her. "What is thy pleasure, and what thy command?" "Do ye know how one can manage to go I know not whither, and fetch I know not what?" "No, we do not know." She closed the book, and the youths disappeared from before her eyes. In the morning the archeress awoke her husband. "Go to the king," said she, "and ask for gold from the treasury for thy journey. Thou hast a pilgrimage of 18 years before thee. When thou hast the money, come back to me to say farewell." The archer went to the king, received a whole purse full of money, and returned to say goodbye to his wife. He gave him a pocket handkerchief and a ball, and said, "When thou goest out of the town, throw this ball in front of thee, and whithersoever it rolls, follow it. Here, too, is my pocket handkerchief. When thou dost wash thyself, wherever thou mayest be, always dry thy face with this handkerchief." The archer took leave of his wife and of his comrades, bowed low on all 4 sides of him, and went beyond the barriers of the city. He threw the ball in front of him, the ball rolled, and he followed hard after it. A month or so passed away, and then the king called the steward and said to him, "The archer has departed to wander about the wide world for 18 years, and it is plain that he will not return alive." Now, 18 years are not 2 weeks, and no little disaster may have befallen him by the way. Go then to the archer's house and bring me his wife to the palace. So the steward went to the archer's house, entered the room, and said to the beautiful archeress, "Hail, thou wise woman! The king commands thee to present thyself at court." So to the court she went. The king received her with joy, and led her into his golden halls, and said to her, "Wilt thou be a queen? I will make thee my spouse." Where was such a thing ever seen? Where was such a thing ever heard, to take a wife away from her living husband? Though he be nothing but a simple archer, he is for all that my lawful husband. If thou come not willingly, I'll take thee by force." But the beauty laughed, stamped upon the floor, turned into a dove, and flew out of the window. The archer passed through many countries and kingdoms, and the ball kept rolling ever onward. Whenever they came to a river, the ball expanded into a bridge, and whenever the archer wished to rest, the ball widened into a downy bed. Whether the time be long or whether it be short, the tale is quickly told, though the deed be not quickly done. Suffice it to say that at last the archer came to a vast and wealthy palace. The ball rolled right up against the door and vanished. The archer fell a-thinking. "I had better go straight on," thought he, so he went up the staircase into a room, and there met him there 3 lovely damsels. "Whence and wherefore hast thou come hither, good man?" said they. "Alas, lovely damsels, ye ask me not to rest from my long journey, but ye begin to torment me with questionings. First ye should give me to eat and drink and let me rest, and then only should ye ask me of my tidings." They immediately laid the table, gave him to eat and drink, and made him lie down to rest. The archer slept away his weariness, rose from his soft bed, and the lovely damsels brought him a washing basin and an embroidered towel. He washed himself in the clear spring water, but the towel he would not take. "I have my handkerchief wherewith to wipe my face," said he, and he drew out the handkerchief and began to dry himself. And the lovely damsels fell a-questioning him. "Tell us, good man, whence hast thou got that handkerchief?" "My wife gave it to me." "Then thou must have married one of our kinswomen." Then they called their old mother, and she looked at the handkerchief, recognizing it the same instant, and cried, "This is indeed my daughter's handkerchief." Then she began to put all manner of questions to the archer. He told her how he had married her daughter, and how the king had bade him go I know not whither, to fetch I know not what. "Alas, my dear son-in-law, not even I have heard of this marvel. But come now, perchance my servants may know of it." Then the old woman fetched her book of spells, turned over the leaves, and immediately there appeared two giants. "What is thy pleasure, and what is thy command?" "Look now, my faithful servants, carry me together with my son-in-law to the wide sea ocean, and place us in the very center of it, in the very abyss." Immediately the giants caught up the archer and the old woman, and bore them as by a hurricane to the wide sea ocean, and placed them in the center of it, in the very abyss. There they stood like two vast columns, and held the archer and the old woman in their arms. Then the old woman cried with a loud voice, and there came swimming up to her all the fish and creeping things of the sea, so that the blue sea was no longer to be seen for the multitude of them. "Hark, ye fishes and creeping things of the sea! Ye who swim everywhere, have ye perchance heard how to go I know not whither, to fetch I know not what?" And all the fishes and creeping things exclaimed with one voice, "No, we have never heard of it." Suddenly a lame old croaking frog forced its way to the front and said, "Croak, croak, I know where this marvel is to be found." "Well, dear, that is just what I want to know," said the old woman, and she took up the frog and bade the giants carry her and her son-in-law home. In an instant they found themselves in their own courtyard. Then the old woman began to question the frog. "How and by what road can my son-in-law go?" And the frog answered, "This place is at the end of the world, far, far away. I would gladly lead him thither myself, but I am so old that I can scarce move my legs. I could not get there in 50 years. The old woman sent for a big jar, filled it with fresh milk, put the frog inside, and said to her son-in-law, "Hold this jar in thy hand, and the frog will show thee the way." The archer took the jar with the frog, took leave of his mother-in-law and his sisters-in-law, and set out on his way. On he went, and the frog showed him the way. Whether it be far or near, long or short, matters not. Suffice it that he came to the fiery river. Beyond this river was a high mountain, and on this mountain a door was to be seen. "Croak, croak," said the frog, "let me out of the jar. We must cross over this river." The archer took it out of the jar and placed it on the ground. "Now, my good youth, sit on me. More firmly. Don't be afraid. Thou wilt not crush me." The youth sat on the frog and pressed it to the very earth. The frog began to swell. It swelled and swelled till it was as large as a haystack. All that the archer now thought of was the risk of falling off. "If I fall off, it will be the death of me," thought he. The frog, when it had done swelling, took a leap and leaped with one big bound right across the fiery stream, and again made itself quite little. "Now, good youth, go through that door, and I'll wait for thee here. Thou wilt come into a cavern, and take care to hide thyself well. In a short time 2 old men will come. Listen to what they are saying, and see what they do, and when they are gone, say and do as they." The archer went into the mountain, opened the door, and was in a cavern dark enough to put one's eyes out. He fumbled his way along, and felt all about him with his arms till he felt an empty chest, into which he got and hid himself. And now, after he had waited some time, 2 old men entered and said, "Hi, Shmat Razum, come and feed us." Note, the nearest equivalent to Shmat Razum is rogue reason. At that very instant, there's no telling how, lightning flashes lit candelabras, it thundered plates and dishes, and various wines and meats appeared upon the table. The old men ate and drank, and then they commanded, "Shmat razum, take it all away." And immediately there was nothing, neither table, nor wine, nor meats, and the candelabras all went out. The archer heard the two old men going out, crept out of the chest and cried, "Hi, shmat razum!" "What is your pleasure?" "Feed me." Again everything appeared. The candelabras were lighted, the table was covered, and all the meats and drinks appeared upon it. The archer sat down at the table and said, "Hi, shmat razum! Come, brother, and sit down with me. Let us eat and drink together. I cannot eat all alone." And an invisible voice answered him, "Alas, good man, whence hath God sent thee? 'Tis 30 years since I have served right trustily the two old men here, and during all that time they have never once asked me to sit down with them." The archer looked about him and was amazed. He saw nobody, yet the meats disappeared from the dishes as if someone was sweeping them away, and the wine bottles lifted themselves up, poured themselves into the glasses, and in a trice the glasses were empty. Then the archer went on eating and drinking, but he said, "Hearken, shmat razum, wilt thou be my servant? Thou shalt have a good time of it with me." "Why should I not? I have long been growing weary here, and thou, I see, art a good man." "Well, get everything ready and come with me." The archer came out of the cave, looked around him, and there was nothing. "Shmat razum, art thou there?" "I am here. Fear not, I'll never desert thee." "Right," replied the archer, and he sat him on the frog. The frog swelled out and leaped across the fiery stream. He placed it in the jar and set off on his return journey. He came to his mother-in-law and bade his new servant regale the old woman and her daughters right royally. Shmat razum feasted them so bountifully that the old woman very nearly danced for joy, and ordered the frog 3 jars of fresh milk every 9 days for its faithful services. The archer then took leave of his mother-in-law and wended his way homeward. He went on till he was utterly exhausted. His swift feet trembled beneath him, and his white arms sank down by his side. "Alas," said he, "Shmat razum, dost thou not see how weary I am? My legs fail me." "Why didst thou not tell it me long ago? I will bring thee to the place alive and well." And immediately the archer was seized by a whirlwind and carried through the air so quickly that his hat fell from his head. "Hi, shmat razum, stop a minute, my hat has fallen from my head." "Too late, master, thou canst not get it. Thy cap is now 5,000 miles behind thee." Towns and villages, rivers and forests melted away beneath the feet of the archer. And now the archer was flying over the deep sea, and Shmat razum said to him, "An thou wilt let me, I would make a golden bower on this sea, and thou wilt be able to rest and be happy." "Do so then," said the archer, and straightway they began descending toward the sea. Then for a moment the waves splashed high, and an islet appeared, and on the islet was a golden pleasure house. Shmat razum said to the archer, "Sit in this pleasure house and rest, and look out upon the sea. 3 merchant vessels will sail by and stop at the islet. Thou must invite the merchants hither, hospitably entertain them, and exchange me for 3 wondrous things which the merchants will bring with them. In due time I will return to thee again." The archer kept watch, and lo, from the west 3 ships came sailing up, and the merchantmen saw the islet and the golden pleasure house. "'Tis a marvel," said they. "How many times have we not sailed hither, and nothing was to be seen but the sea? And now behold, a golden pleasure house is here. Come, friends, let us put to shore and feast our eyes upon it." So immediately they lowered the sails and cast the anchor. 3 of the merchants sat them in a light skiff, and they came to the shore. "Hail, good man! Hail, ye wayfaring merchants, ye men of many marts! Be so good as to turn in to me. Stroll about at your ease, make merry and repose. This pleasure house was built expressly for guests that come by sea." The merchants entered the bower and sat them down on footstools. "Hi, Shmat razum," cried the archer, "give us to eat and drink." The table appeared, and on the table was wine and savory meats. Whatever the soul desired was there for the wishing. The merchants sighed for envy. "Come," said they, "let us make an exchange. Thou give us thy servant, and take from us what marvels thou likest best." "Well, what marvels have ye then? Look and see." And one of the merchants drew out of his pocket a little casket, and he had no sooner opened it than a lovely garden spread out all over the island, with fragrant flowers and pleasant paths. but when he shut the casket, the garden immediately disappeared. The second merchant drew from beneath the folds of his garment an axe, and began to tap with it. Rap-tap, out came a ship. Rap-tap, out came another ship. 100 times he rapped and made 100 ships with sails and guns and crews, complete. The ships sailed, the sailors stood by the guns, and took orders from the merchant. The merchant gloried in it for a while, but then he concealed his axe, and the ships vanished out of sight just as if they had never been. The third merchant produced a horn, blew into one end of it, and immediately an army appeared, both horse and foot, with cannons and banners, and through all the ranks went the roll of martial music, and the armor of the warriors flashed like fire in the sunlight. The merchant rejoiced in it all. Then he took his horn and blew into the other end of it, and there was nothing to be seen. The whole of that martial might was no more. "Your marvels are well enough, but they are of no use to me," said the archer. "Your hosts and your fleets would do honor to a Tsar, but I am only a simple archer. If you would change with me, then must you give me all your 3 wonders in exchange for my 1 invisible servant." "But is not that too much?" "Know ye that I'll make no other exchange." The merchants considered among themselves. "What's the use of this garden, these ships, and these hosts to us? 'Twill be better to make the exchange. At any rate, we shall always be able to eat and drink our fill without the least trouble." So they gave the archer their wonders and said, "Well, Shmat Razum, we'll take thee with us. Wilt thou serve us well and loyally?" "Why should I not serve you? 'Tis all one with me, with whom I live." The merchants returned to their ships and regaled all their crews right royally. "Hi, Shmat Razum, bestir thyself!" And every one on board ate and drank his fill, and lay down and slept heavily. But the archer sat in his golden bower and grew pensive and said, "Alas, my heart yearns after my faithful servant, Shmat Razum. I wonder where he is now." "I am here, master." The archer was glad. "Is it not time for us to hasten home?" And he had no sooner spoken than it seemed as though a whirlwind seized him and bore him into the air. The merchants awoke from their sleep and wanted to drink away the effects of their carouse. "Hi, Shmat Razum, give us more drink." But no one answered. No one rendered them that service. Order and shout as they might, things remained precisely as they were. "Well, brothers, this sharper has befooled us. The devil take him, and may the island vanish and the golden bower perish." Thus the merchants lamented and lamented. Then they spread their sails and departed whither their business called them. The archer flew back to his country and descended in a waste place by the blue sea. "Hi, Shmat Razum, can we not build us a little castle here?" "Why not? It shall be ready immediately." And immediately the castle sprang up, more beautiful than words can tell. 'Twas twice as good as a royal palace. The archer opened his casket, and a garden immediately appeared round the castle, with pleasant country paths and marvelous flowers. There sat the archer at the open window and quite fell in love with his garden. Suddenly a dove flew in at the window, plumped down upon the ground, and turned into his lovely young wife. They embraced and greeted each other. And the wife said to the archer, "Ever since thou didst leave the house, I have been flying as a blue dove among the woods and groves. How happily we will now live together for evermore." Early the next morning the king came out on his balcony and looked toward the blue sea, and behold, on the very shore stood a new castle, and round the castle was a green garden. "Who then is this presumptuous stranger who builds on my land without my leave?" Then his couriers ran thither, asked questions, and came back and told him that this castle was built by the archer, and he himself dwelt in this castle and his wife with him. The king was more angry than ever, and he bade them assemble a host and go to the shores of the sea, root up the garden, batter the castle into little bits, and bring the archer and his wife to him. The archer saw the king's army coming against him, and it was very strong. Then he seized his axe quickly and rapped with it. Rap-tap! Out came a ship. He rapped 100 times and made 100 ships. Then he seized his horn and blew once, and a host of footmen rolled out. He blew again, and a host of horse rolled out. The commanders of all the corps came rushing up to him and asked him for orders. The archer bade them begin the battle. The music struck up, the drums rolled, the regiments moved forward against the royal host. The infantry, like a solid wall, broke down their center, the horse cut them off at the wings and took them captive, and the guns from the fleet played upon the capital. The king saw that all his host was flying, and rushed forward to stop them. But how? He could not do it, and in a moment he was swept from his horse in the midst of the fierce fight, and trampled underfoot. When the fight was over, the people assembled together, and begged the archer to accept the whole realm from their hands. To this he gave his consent, and ruled that kingdom peaceably all the days of his life. End of Go I Know Not Whither, Fetch I Know Not What. Kuzma Skorobogaty. There was once a peasant and his wife, and they had one son, and he, though good, was a blockhead, and no good at all for working in the fields. "Husband mine," said the mother, "there is not much wit in our son, and he will eat us out of house and home. Send him away, let him live by himself and make his own way in the world." So they sent away their son. They gave him a most wretched little nag, a tumble-down hut in the wood, and a cock with 5 hens. And little Kuzma lived alone, all alone in the dark wood. The little she-fox scented out the fowls that were right under her very nose in the wood, and determined to pay a visit to Kuzma's hut. One day, little Kuzma went out to hunt, and no sooner had he left the hut than the little fox, who was on the watch all the time, ran up, killed one of the hens, roasted it, and ate it up. Little Kuzma returned, and behold, one of the hens was gone. And he thought, I suppose the vulture must have pounced down on it. The next day he again went out hunting. He happened to fall in with the fox, and she asked him, "Whither away, little Kuzma?" "I am going a-hunting, little fox." "Well, goodbye." And immediately she scampered off to his hut, killed another hen, cooked it, and ate it. Little Kuzma came home and counted his hens, and another was missing. And it occurred to him, what if the little fox has tasted of my hens? On the 3rd day he nailed up the door and window of his hut strongly, so strongly, and went about his business as usual. And the fox turned up from somewhither and said to him, "Whither away, little Kuzma?" "I go a-hunting, little fox." "Well, goodbye." Off she ran to Kuzma's hut, and he followed her track back too. The fox ran all round the hut, and saw that the door and window were nailed up strongly, oh, so strongly. How was she to get into the hut? So up she climbed and disappeared down the chimney. Then up came Kuzma and caught the fox. "Aha!" cried he. "Look what a thief pays me visits. Wait a bit, my little lady. You shall not get out of my hands alive." Then the little fox began to implore Kuzma, "Don't kill me. I'll get thee betrothed to a rich bride. Only please roast me one more fowl, the fattest, with lots of nice oil." Little Kuzma fell a-thinking, and then he killed one more fowl for the little fox. "There, eat, little fox, and much good may it do thee." The fox ate it up, licked her chaps, and said, "Behind this wood is the tsardom of the great and terrible Tsar Ogon, which means fire. His wife is a Tsaritsa Molnya, which is lightning, and they have a daughter, a most beautiful Tsarevna. I'll marry thee to her." "Who would take a poor fellow like me?" "Silence, that's not thy business." And the little fox set off to Tsar Ogon and the Tsaritsa Molnya. She ran all the way to them, entered their palace, made a low obeisance, and said, "Hail, mighty potent Tsar Ogon and terrible Tsaritsa Molnya." "Hail to thee, fox. What nice little piece of good news hast thou brought us?" "Well, I have come to you as a matchmaker. You have the bride, and I have the young bridegroom, Kuzna Skorobogaty, which is quick rich." "Where is he buried that he does not come himself?" "He cannot quit his principality. He rules over the wild beasts and takes his pleasure with them." "So that's the sort of bridegroom you present us with. Well, go back to him and say that he must send us 40 forties of grey wolves, and then we'll accept him as the bridegroom." Then the little fox ran to the meadows which lay beneath this very wood, and began rolling about in these meadows. A wolf came running up and said, "I see, gossip, that you've had a good feed somewhere, or you would not roll about like that. I wish I had not eaten so much. I've been at a banquet with the Tsar and Tsaritsa." "You mean to say that you've not been invited there, gossip? Impossible! Why, all the wild beasts were there, and as for the sables and ermines, there was no end to them. The bears were still sitting there when I left, and eating like anything." The wolf began to beg the fox humbly, "Little fox, can't you take me to the Tsar's banquet?" "Why not? Hearken. Go you, and collect by tomorrow 40 forties of your brethren, the grey wolves, and I'll lead the whole lot of you thither." On the following day the wolves assembled, and the fox led them to the Tsar's white stone palace, placed them all in rows, and announced to the Tsar, "Mighty and potent Tsar Ogan and terrible Tsaritsa Molnya, thy destined son-in-law has sent thee gifts. Lo, a whole herd of grey wolves does obeisance to you, and the number of them is 40 forties." The Tsar bade them drive all the wolves into the enclosure, and said to the fox, "If my destined son-in-law is able to send me wolves as a present, let him now also send me just as many bears." The little fox ran to little Kuzma, and bade him roast another fowl, ate her fill of it, and ran off again to the fenced meadows of the Tsar. Thither she went, and fell a-rolling about under the self-same wood. And out of the wood came running a shaggy bear, and looked at the fox. "Well, gossip fox," said he, "you have plainly had your fill, or what has come over you to make you roll about in the grass so merrily?" "Had my fill? I should think so. I have been to the Tsar's banquet. There were many of us beasts there, and sables and ermines without number. The wolves are feasting there now, and a nice dinner they are making of it." Bruin straightway began to beg the fox to let him go. "Little fox, won't you lead me also to the Tsar's banquet?" "Very well, hearken. Bring together by tomorrow 40 forties of black bears, and I'll lead you thither with pleasure, for of course the Tsar's cooks would not make ready for you alone." Old Bandy-Legs wandered all about the woods, proclaimed the news to all the bears, and got together as many bears as the fox had commanded. And the fox led them to the Tsar's white stone palace, arranged them in rows, and announced, "Mighty and potent Tsar Ogan, and terrible Tsaritsa Molnya, your destined son-in-law salutes you with a present of 40 forties of black bears." The Tsar bade them drive the bears also into the enclosure, and said to the fox, "If my destined son-in-law can send me so many bears and wolves as a gift, let him now send us also just as many martens and sables." The fox again hastened off to Kuzma, bade him roast the last hen, together with the cock, and when she had eaten them in his honor, she went again to the fenced meadows of the Tsar and began rolling about in the grass. A sable and a marten came running by. "Where have you been feeding so fatly, sly Mistress Foxy?" they asked. "What? Ye live in the wood, and yet don't know that I am held in great honor by the Tsar? This day I have conducted the wolves and the bears to his banquet. By this time they will be unable to tear themselves away from the Tsar's tidbits. Never have they had such a feast from the day of their birth." Then the sable and the marten also began wheedling the fox. "Dear little dovey gossip, wilt not thou lead us to the Tsar? We will only look on afar off while the others eat. If ye will bring together 40 forties of your sables and martens, a dinner shall be got ready for the whole lot of you. But a couple of you all alone would not even be admitted into the courtyard." The next day the sables and the martens came together, and the fox led them to Tsar Ogan, made obeisance to him on behalf of his future son-in-law, and presented him with the 40 forties of sables and martens. The Tsar accepted the gift and said, "Thanks. Tell my destined son-in-law to come to me himself. We want to have a look at him, and it is time he saw his bride." The next day the little fox again came running to court. The Tsar asked her, "Where then is our destined son-in-law?" The little fox replied, "He bade me bow low before you and say that today he cannot manage to come to you." "How so?" "Well, he is exceedingly busy. He is getting together all his things to come to you, and just now he is counting up his treasures. So he begs you to lend him a corn measure with which to measure his silver money. His own corn measures are all brimful of gold." The Tsar, without more ado, gave the fox the corn measure, but he said to himself, "Well done, fox. This is something like a son-in-law that has fallen to our lot. He actually measures his gold and silver with corn measures?" The next day the fox again came running to court, and returned the Tsar his corn measure, but she had stuck little silver pieces all about the corners of it, and said, "Your destined son-in-law, Kuzma Skorobogati, bade me bow low to you and say that this day he'll be with you with all his riches." The Tsar was delighted, and bade them have everything ready for the reception of the precious guest. But the little fox set off for Kuzma's hut, and there for the last 2 days Kuzma had been lying on the stove, hungry, oh so hungry, and waiting. The fox said to him, "Why dost thou lie down like that? I have got thee a bride from Tsar Ogon and the Tsaritsa Mulya. Let us come to them as guests and celebrate the wedding." "Why, fox, art thou out of thy wits? How can I go when I have not even clothes to cover me?" "Go, saddle thy nag, I say, and don't bother thy head about that." Kuzma brought out his sorry jade from beneath the shed, covered it with a mat, put on the reins, jumped on its back, and set off after the fox at a light trot. They were already drawing near to the palace when they came across a little bridge directly in their path. "Jump off thy horse," said the fox to Kuzma, "and saw through the buttresses of this bridge." So little Kuzma fell a-sawing with all his might, and sawed through the buttresses of the bridge. Down came the bridge with a crash. "Now strip thyself naked, throw thy horse and all thy clothes into the water, and roll about in the sand and wait for me." That's what the fox said, and then off she ran to the Tsar and the Tsaritsa and cried to them from afar, "Hi, dear little father, such an accident! Help, help!" "What's the matter, dear little foxy?" asked the Tsar. "Why this, the bridges in your tsardom are not strong enough. Your destined son-in-law was coming to you with all his riches, and this sorry bridge broke down beneath the weight of them, and all his wealth and all his people have fallen in, and he himself is lying on the bridge more dead than alive." The Tsar made a great to-do, and shrieked at his servants and cried, "Haste ye, as quickly as ye can, and take off my royal robes for Kuzma Skorobogatty, and save him from mortal harm." And the envoys of the Tsar ran as fast as they could to the bridge, and there they saw little Kuzma rolling about in the sand. They picked him up, washed and dried him all over, arrayed him in the royal robes, curled his hair, and led him respectfully to the palace. The Tsar, full of joy that his destined son-in-law had been delivered from such peril, bade them ring all the bells, fire all the guns, and celebrate the wedding at once. So they crowned Kuzma as the groom of the Tsarevna, and he dwelt with his father-in-law and sang songs all day. And the fox was held in high honor at court, till life at court ceased to weary her, and she had no longer any desire to return to the woods. The Tsarevna, loveliness inexhaustible. A long time ago, far from our days, in a certain tsardom, in a certain empire, lived a famous Tsar, Afron Afronovitch, and he had 3 youthful sons, the eldest the Tsarevich Dmitri, the second the Tsarevich Vasily, and the youngest the Tsarevich Ivan. The sons of Afron were all grown up. The youngest had reached his 17th year, while Tsar Afron himself had left 60 years behind him. And once, as Tsar Afron fell a-thinking and looked at his son, his heart grew sad. "Look now," thought he, "life is a good thing to these youths, and they rejoice in God's fair world. But as for me, I feel old age drawing nigh, and diverse diseases begin to afflict me, and the wide world has now but little delight for me. How will it be with me henceforth? How shall I escape old age?" Thus he thought, and so he fell asleep. And a vision appeared to the Tsar. Somewhere or other beyond lands thrice 9, in the empire of thrice 10, dwelt the Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible, the daughter of 3 mothers, the granddaughter of 3 grandmothers, the sister of 9 brothers. And under the pillow of this Tsarevna was preserved a flask of living water, and whosoever drank of this water straightway became 30 years younger. No sooner did the Tsar Afron awake from his sleep than he called together his children and the wise men of his realm, and said to them, "Interpret me this dream, ye my sages and cunning counselors. What shall I do, and how can I discover the Tsarevna?" The sages were silent. The cunning counselors stroked their long grey beards, looked up and down, scratched their heads, and thus they answered the Tsar Afron. "O sovereign Tsar, though we have not seen this thing with our eyes, yet our ears have heard of this Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible. But how to find her, and which way to get at her, that we know not." No sooner did the 3 Tsareviches hear this, than with one voice they thus implored their father the Tsar. "Dear Father Tsar, give us thy blessing, and send us to the 4 corners of the earth, that we may see people and show ourselves and discover the Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible." The father agreed, gave them provision for the journey, took leave of them tenderly, and sent them off to the 4 corners of the earth. When the 2 elder brothers got beyond the city gates, they turned to the right, but the youngest brother, the Tsarevich Ivan, turned to the left. The elder brothers had got only 100 miles and no more from home when they met an old man, and he asked them, "Whither are ye going, young men? Is your journey far?" But the Tsareviches replied, "Take yourself off, old rogue. What business is it of yours?" The old man said nothing, but went on his way. The Tsareviches went on, all that day and the next, and a whole week, and they came to such a wilderness that they could see neither earth nor sky, nor any living being, nor any habitation. And in the deepest depth of this wilderness they met another old man, even older than the first. "Hail, good youth," said he to the Tsareviches. "Are ye truants and rest, or are ye in quest?" "Why, we are in quest of something, of course. We are going in search of the Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible, with her flask of living water." "Nay, my good youth," said the aged stranger, "'twere better ye did not try to get thither." "And why, pray?" "I'll tell you. 3 rivers cross this road, rivers large and broad. On these rivers are 3 ferries. At the first ferry they'll cut off your right arm, at the second your left, but at the third they'll cut off your head." The brothers Tsareviches were sore distressed, their giddy pates hung down below their sturdy shoulders, and they thought to themselves, "Ought we not to have some regard for our father's head and our own heads also? 'Twill be much better to return home alive and well, and wait for fine weather by the sea." And they turned back. And when they were a 24 hours' journey from home, they resolved to rest in the fields. And they spread their tents with the golden tent poles, let their horses out to graze, and said, "Here we'll stop and await our brother, and while away the time in idleness." But with the Tsarevich Ivan it fared far otherwise on his journey. There met him the same old man who had encountered his brothers, and this old man asked him the self-same question, "Whither art thou going, young man? Is thy journey far?" And the Tsarevich Ivan answered him, "What is that to thee? I want to have nothing to say to thee." But afterward, when he had gone a little farther, he bethought himself of what he had done. "Why did I answer the old man so rudely? Old people are full of ideas. Perchance he might have advised me well." So he turned his horse, overtook the old man, and said, "Stay, my father, I did not quite hear what thou saidst to me." "I asked thee whether thy journey was far." "Well, my father, the fact is I am in search of the Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible, the daughter of 3 mothers, the granddaughter of 3 grandmothers, the sister of 9 brothers. I want from her the living water from my father, the Tsar." "Well," said the old man, "'tis well for thee, good youth, that thou hast answered courteously, and therefore I will put thee in the right way. But thou wilt never get there on an ordinary horse." "Then whence shall I get me an extraordinary horse?" "I'll tell thee. Return home, and bid your grooms drive all thy father's horses down to the blue sea, and whichever horse breaks away from the others and goes right into the sea up to his neck, and begins to drink till the blue sea begins to rise and dash from shore to shore, him seize and mount." "I thank thee for thy good words, my father." The Tsarevich did as the old man bade him. He chose the most valiant charger from among his father's horses, watched all through the night, and when on the following morning he went and mounted into the saddle, the horse spoke to him with a man's voice. "Tsarevich Ivan, dismount! I will buffet thee thrice to give thee the muscles of a hero." He buffeted once, he buffeted twice, but the third time he buffeted not at all. "I see," cried he, "that if I were to buffet thee a third time, the whole land would not be able to hold us both." Then the Tsarevich Ivan sat on the horse, put on knightly armor, took out of the armory of his father's palace an old heroic trusty blade, and set out upon his quest. He went for a day, and for a night, for a month, and for 2 months, and 3. And so he came to a place where his horse was in water up to the knees, and in grass up to the breast, while he, poor youth, had nothing to eat. And in the midst of this wilderness the Tsarevich Ivan found a miserable hut. This hut stood upon fowl's legs, and in it was the Baba Yaga. The bony-legged witch was lying down, and her legs stretched from corner to corner. The Tsarevich went into the hut and cried, "Hail, Granny!" "Hail to thee, Tsarevich Ivan! Hast come to rest, or art thou in quest?" I am in quest of something, Granny. I am off beyond lands thrice 9 to the empire of thrice 10. I seek the Tsarevna loveliness inexhaustible. I want from her the living water from my father the Tsar." The Baba Yaga answered, "Though I have not seen it with my eyes, I have heard of it with my ears. But thou wilt never get there." "Wherefore?" "Because before thee there are 3 fairies. At the first thou cut off thy right hand, at the second thy left, and at the third thy head." "Well, Granny, one single head is not such a great matter. I'll go, and God's will be done." "Alas, O Tsarevich Ivan, 'twere much better to turn back. Thou art still young and tender. Thou hast never been in dangerous places. Thou hast never faced great terrors." "Nay, Granny, he who has said A must also say B." So he took leave of the Baba Yaga and went on farther, and he came at last to the first ferry, and he saw the ferrymen on the other side lying down asleep. The Tsarevich Ivan stood on the bank and thought to himself, "If I call to them, I shall deafen them forever. And if I whistle with all my might, I shall upset the ferry boat." So he whistled a half whistle, and immediately the ferrymen started from their slumber and rowed him across the stream. "What do ye want for your labors, my friends?" asked the Tsarevich Ivan. "Well, what's the use of haggling? Give us your right arm," cried the ferrymen with one voice. "Nay, nay, I want my arm for myself," cried the Tsarevich Ivan. And drawing forth his stout blade, he struck to the right and to the left, and beat all the ferrymen till they were half dead, and then went on farther. And in this way he crossed the other 2 fords also. At last he came to the empire of thrice 10, and on the borders of it stood a wild man, in stature like a tree of the forest, as thick-set as a haystack. There he stood, and in his hand he held a club of oak. And the giant said to the Tsarevich Ivan, "Whither art thou going, O worm?" "I am going to the realm of the Tsarevna loveliness inexhaustible, to get the living water from my father the Tsar." "What, thou pygmy? I've been guarding her realm here these 100 years. I have had my fill of heroes, not like thee were the youths who came hither, yet they all fell beneath my hand, and their bones all lie over there. But as for thee, thou art a mere worm." The Tsarevich saw that he could not overcome the giant, so he turned his horse aside. He went on and on into the very depths of the forest till he came upon a hut, and in this hut sat a very old, old woman. The moment she saw the good youth, she cried, "Hail! Tsarevich Ivan, why hath God sent thee hither?" The Tsarevich told her all his secrets. The old woman had pity on him, and drew from her stove a magic poisonous weed in a little ball. "Go into the open plain," said she, "rake up a fire, and throw this magic poisonous weed into it. But mark me now, stand thou at the back of the blast, lest the smoke from the fire blow upon thee. This blast will cause the giant to be overcome by a deep sleep. Then do thou cut off his head, but roll the ball before thee, and follow whithersoever it rolls. The ball will lead thee to those very places where reigns the Tsarevna loveliness inexhaustible. The Tsarevna walks about there for 9 days, and on the 10th day after that she will refresh herself with the sleep of heroes in her own place. But look to it that thou dost not enter in by the gate, but leap right over the wall with all thy might, and do not stick in the strings at the top of the wall, lest thou arouse the whole empire when thou wilt not escape alive. But the moment thou hast leaped over the wall, go straight into the palace, into the back chamber. Open the door very, very softly, and draw out the flask of living water from beneath the pillow of the Tsarevna. But when thou hast got the flask, hasten back as quickly as thou camest, nor look for an instant upon the beauty of the Tsarevna, lest it be too much for thee, good youth." The Tsarevich Ivan thanked the old woman, and did everything she bade him. As soon as he had lighted the fire, he threw the weed into it, so that the smoke spread in the direction where the wild man was standing on guard. The eyes of the giant grew dim, he began to yawn and stretch, he laid him on the damp earth, and began to sleep soundly, very soundly. The Tsarevich Ivan cut off his head, rolled the little ball along, and went on farther. He went on, and far away the golden palace began to gleam amid the green of the forest. All at once a column of dust came out of the palace and along the road, and the gleam of lances and cuirasses were visible through the dust, and there was a sound as of the trampling of many warlike chargers. The ball rolled out of the road a little on one side. The Tsarevich Ivan, following after it, also turned from the path, went among the bushes, and led his horse out to grass. And from his place in the bushes he saw approaching the Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible, and she diverted herself with her warriors in the green meadows. And the whole of the Tsarevna's array consisted of maidens alone, each one more beautiful than her neighbor. But the most lovely of them all was the inexhaustibly lovely Tsarevna. She pitched her tent in the meadows, and for 9 days she and her maidens diverted themselves with diverse pastimes. But the Tsarevich, like a hungry wolf, looked out from his hiding place at the Tsarevna. He could not take his eyes from her, and look as he might, he could not look his fill. At last, on the 10th day, when everyone in the Tsarevna's golden courts was asleep, he, spurring his horse with all his might, leaped right over the wall into the garden court of the ladies, fastened his horse to a wooden post, and stealthily as a thief made his way into the palace, right into the very cabinet where, extended on her downy bed, with her fair locks scattered all about, lay the Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible, sleeping an unwakeable, heroic sleep. The Tsarevich drew from under her pillow the flask with the living water, and was about to run off as quickly as he could, but it was too much for his youthful heart, and leaning over the Tsarevna he kissed her thrice on her lips, which were sweeter than sugar. And by the time he had got out of the chamber, mounted his horse, and leaped across the wall, she awoke from his kisses. Loveliness Inexhaustible leaped on her swift-flying mare, and hastened after the Tsarevich Ivan. The Tsarevich urged on his good steed, pulled at the silken reins, and lashed its sides with his whip. And the horse spoke to him with a man's voice. "Wherefore dost thou beat me, Tsarevich Ivan? Neither the fowls of the air nor the beasts of the forest can escape or hide from that mare. She runs so that the earth trembles. She leaps across swift rivers from shore to shore. Hills and dales vanish away beneath her feet." And it had only time to speak these words when the Tsarevna overtook the good youth, struck him with her swinging blade, and pierced him full in the breast. Down fell the Tsarevich Ivan from his horse to the moist ground. His bright eyes closed, his red blood flowed. Loveliness Inexhaustible gazed upon him, and a great sorrow overcame her. She saw that such a lovely youth as that was not to be found in the wide world. And she placed her white hand on the wound, washed it with living water out of her flask, and immediately the wound healed up, and the Tsarevich Ivan arose well and unharmed. "Wilt thou take me to wife?" "That I will, Tsarevna." "Then return to thy kingdom, and if after 3 years thou hast not forgotten me, I will be thy wife, and thou shalt be my husband." And the destined bridegroom took leave of his bride, and they went in different directions. The Tsarevich Ivan went on and on for a long time and saw many things, and at last he came upon a tent on a mountain with a golden tent pole, and round the tent 2 good horses were feeding on white summer wheat and drinking mead, and in the tent were lying his 2 elder brothers, eating and drinking and diverting themselves with manifold diversions. And the elder brothers began to ask the younger one, "Hast thou got the living water for our father?" "I have got it," replied the Tsarevich Ivan simply, for he always spoke out his secrets, happen what might. The elder brothers invited him to feast with them, made him drunk, drew the flask of living water out of his bosom, and threw him down a precipice. The Tsarevich Ivan flew down, and at last he fell into the realm beneath the earth. "And now," thought he, "irretrievable ruin has come upon me. I can never find the ways that lead hence." So he went about in the realm beneath the earth. He went on, and saw that the day grew shorter and shorter, till it was like night. And at last he came to a place that was not a desert, and by the sea stood a castle that was a town, and a hut that was a mansion. The Tsarevich went up a flight of steps into a barn, and from the barn he went into the hut, prayed to God, and begged for a good night's rest. But in the hut sat an old woman, a very old woman. She was all wrinkled and grey. "Good youth," cried she, "thou mayest sleep there in welcome. But say, how didst thou get hither?" "Thou art an old person, granny, but thy way of asking is not wise. Thou shouldst first give me to eat and drink, and let me lie down to sleep, and after that ask me concerning my tidings." The old woman gave the Tsarevich to eat and drink, let him lie down to sleep, and then asked him again. And the Tsarevich Ivan said to her, "I have been in the kingdom of thrice 10, as the guest of the Tsarevna Loveliness Inexhaustible, and now I am returning home to my father the Tsar Afron, but I have wandered from my path. Canst thou not show me the way home?" "I do not know it myself, Tsarevich. Here have I been living 9/10 of my life on this earth, and I have never heard of the Tsar Afron. Come now, sleep in peace, and tomorrow I will bring together my messengers. Perhaps one of them may know." The next day the Tsarevich got up very early, washed himself quite white, and went out with the old woman on the balcony. And the old woman cried with a piercing voice, "Hi, hi, ye swimming fish of the sea, and ye creeping reptiles of the earth, my faithful servants, assemble here to the very last one of you." And immediately the blue sea was disturbed, and all the fishes assembled, both small and great, and all the reptiles assembled. They all came down to the shore under the water. "Does anyone know where in all the world dwells the Tsar Afron, and by what way one can get to his kingdom from here?" And all the fishes and reptiles answered with one voice, "We have neither seen it with our eyes nor heard it with our ears." Then the old woman turned to the other side and screeched, "Hi, ye wandering beasts of the forest, and ye fowls that fly in the air, my trusty servants, assemble hither, and fly and run hither, all of you, down to the very last one." And the beasts of the forest came running in bands and bands, and the fowls of the air came flying in flocks and flocks, and the old woman began to ask them about Tsar Afron, and they all with one voice exclaimed to the old woman, "We have neither seen it with our eyes nor heard it with our ears." "Well, Tsarevich, there is none else to ask now. We've asked them all." They were just about to go into the hut again when there was a whistling and a roaring sound in the air, and the bird Mogol came flying along. He hid the light of day with his wings and lighted on the ground close to the hut. "Where hast thou been, and why art thou come so late?" screeched the old woman. "I have been flying a long way off, in the realm of Tsar Afron, at the uttermost end of the wide world." "Well, thou art just the one I want. Render me now true and loyal service. Carry thither the Tsarevich Ivan." "I shall be glad to carry him, but I shall want all the food thou canst gather. It takes 3 years to fly thither. Take as much as thou dost want." And the old woman made provision for the journey of the Tsarevich Ivan. She placed upon the bird a hogshead of water, and on the top of it a wicker basket full of meat, and put into his hands an iron pole. "There," said she, "when thou fliest on the bird Mogol, and she turns and looks at thee, immediately plunge thy pole into the basket and give her a piece of beef." The Tsarevich Ivan said thank you to the old woman, sat on the bird, and immediately she rose with him and bore him up in the air like a whirlwind. She flew and flew. She flew for a long, long time, and whenever she looked round at the Tsarevich, he fed her with beef off the pole. And at last the Tsarevich Ivan saw that the basket was getting empty, so he said to the bird Mogol, "Look now, thou bird Mogol, thou hast now but little food left. Light upon the moist earth, and I'll get thee another basket full of diverse meats." But the bird Mogol answered and said, "Art thou mad, Tsarevich Ivan? Beneath us now is a forest, dark and drear, muddy and boggy. If we lighted down there, thou and I would never get out again so long as the world lasts." And now the Tsarevich had dispensed all the meat from the basket, and sent the basket and the hogshead flying off the bird. But the bird Mogol still kept on flying and turning its head for food. What was to be done now? The Tsarevich Ivan cut off the calves of his legs, put them on the pole, and gave them to the bird Mogol. She swallowed them up and descended with the Tsarevich Ivan into a green meadow upon silky grass with azure flowers. As the Tsarevich Ivan leaped off her onto the ground, the bird Mogol coughed up his calves again, fastened them onto his legs, moistened them with her spittle, and the Tsarevich went on his way well and strong. He came to the capital of Tsar Afron, his own father, and saw that something amiss was going on in the town. Crowds of people were wandering about the streets from end to end. The Tsar's cunning counselors were strolling aimlessly about the city, asking something from everyone they met, and shaking their grey heads as if they were out of their wits. And the Tsarevich asked one of the people he met, "What's the meaning of all this commotion in the city?" And the good people answered him, "The Tsarevna, loveliness inexhaustible, is sailing against our kingdom. She is bringing a countless host with her in 40 ships, and she demands that the Tsar should surrender to her the Tsarevich Ivan, who disturbed her sleep 3 years ago by kissing her on her lips, which are sweeter than sugar. And if we do not surrender him, she will destroy our kingdom utterly with fire and sword." "Well, it seems to me that I have come just in time. I want this Tsarevna just as much as she wants me." And he immediately went on board the Tsarevna's ship. Here they embraced and fondled each other and received their bridal crowns in the Church of God. And after that they went to the Tsar Afron and told him all. The Tsar Afron drove his elder sons from court, deprived them of their inheritance, and lived with his younger son, and lived happily and increased in all riches. Fairly Oka. There was once upon a time an old man and an old woman, and they had 2 orphan grandchildren, so lovely, gentle, and good that the old man and the old woman could not love them enough. The old man once took it into his head to go out into the fields with his grandchildren to look at the peas, and they saw that their peas were growing splendidly. The old man rejoiced at the sight with his grandchildren and said, "Well now, you won't find peas like that in the whole world. By and by we'll make kisel out of it and bake us some pea cakes." And next morning the grandfather sent the eldest grandchild and said, "Go and drive away the sparrows from the peas." The grandchild sat down beside the peas, shook a dry branch, and kept on saying, "Whish, whish, sparrows, ye have pecked at grandfather's peas till you're quite full." And all at once she heard a rumbling and a roaring in the wood, and Fairly Oka came. Huge of stature, with one eye, a hooked nose, ragged stubbly hair, mustaches half an ell long, swine's bristles on his head, hobbling on one leg in a wooden boot, leaning on a crutch, grinding all his teeth and smiling. He went up to the pretty little grandchild, seized her and dragged her away with him behind the lake. The grandfather waited and waited, but there was no grandchild, and he sent his young grandson after her. Fairly Oka walked off with him also. The grandfather waited and waited and said to his wife, "How very late our grandchildren are. I suppose they are running about there and idling their time away, or catching starlings with some lads or other, and meanwhile the sparrows are stealing our peas. Go along, old woman, and teach them sense." The old woman rose from the stove, took her stick from the corner, gave the pasties another turn, went away, and never came back. As soon as Fairly Oka saw her in the field, he cried, "What dost thou want here, old hag? Hast thou come hither to shell peas? Then I'll make thee stand here among the peas forever and ever." Then he set to work belabouring her with his crutch, till little by little her very soul oozed out of her, and she lay upon the field more dead than alive. The grandfather waited in vain for his grandchildren and his old wife, and began to scold at them. "Where on earth have they got to?" said he. "'Tis a true saying that a man must expect no good from his ribs." Then the old man himself made his way to the peas, and saw the old woman lying on the ground in such a battered condition that he scarcely knew her, and of his grandchildren there was no trace. The grandfather cried aloud, picked up the old woman, dragged her home by degrees, gradually brought her to with a little cold water, and she opened her eyes at last and told the grandfather who it was that had beaten her so, and dragged her grandchildren away from the field. The grandfather was very wroth with Fairly Oka and said, "This is too much of a joke. Wait a bit, friend. We also have arms of our own. Look to thyself, Fairly Oka, and take care that I don't twist thy mustaches for thee. Thou hast done this thing with thy hand, thou shalt pay for it with thy head." And as the old grandmother did not hold him back, the grandfather seized his iron crutch and went off to seek Fairly Oka. He went on till he came to a little pond, and in the pond was swimming a bob-tailed drake. He saw the grandfather and cried, So, live for 100 years, old granddad. I have been waiting here for thee a long time. Hail to thee also, drake. Why hast thou been awaiting me?" "Well, I know that thou art in quest of thy grandchildren, and art going to Fairly Oka to settle accounts with him." "And how dost thou come to know of this monster?" So, screeched the drake. "I have good cause to know him. 'Twas he who docked my tail." "Then canst thou show me his dwelling?" So, screeched the drake. "Here am I but a little tiny bird, but I'll have my tail's worth out of him, I know." Wilt thou go on before and show me the way? I see thou hast a good noddle of thy own, though thou art bob-tailed." Then the drake came out of the water and climbed up on the bank, waddling from side to side. They went on, and they came upon a little bit of cord lying in the road, and it said, "Hail, little Grandad Wise-Pate." "Hail, little cord. Where dost thou dwell, and whither dost thou wander?" "I live in such and such a place. I am going to pay off Fairlioka. He has beaten my old woman and carried off my 2 grandchildren, and such splendid grandchildren too. Take me that I may help." The grandfather thought, "I may as well take it. It will do to hang Fairlioka with." Then he said to the little cord, "Come along with us, if thou dost know the way." And the little cord wriggled after them, just as if it were a little tapering snake. They went on, and they saw lying in the road a little watermill, and it said to them, "Hail, little Grandad Wise-Pate." "Hail, little watermill. Where dost thou dwell, and whither dost thou wander?" "I live in such and such a place, and I am going to settle accounts with Fairlioka. Just fancy, he has beaten my old woman and carried off my grandchildren, and such splendid grandchildren too. Take me with thee that I may help." And the grandfather thought, "The watermill may be of use too." Then the watermill raised itself up, pressed against the ground with its handle, and went along after the grandfather. Again they went on, and in the road lay an acorn, and it said to them in a little squeaky voice, "Hail, Grandad Longnose. Hail, Oaky Acorn. Whither art thou striding away like that?" "I am going to beat Fairlioka. Dost know him?" "I should think I did. Take me with thee to help." "But how canst thou help?" Then the grandfather thought to himself, "I may as well let him go." So he said to the acorn, "Roll on behind then." But that was a strange rolling, for the acorn leaped to its feet and frisked along in front of them all. And they came into a thick forest, a forest most drear and dreadful, and in the forest stood a lonely little hut, oh, so lonely. There was no fire burning in the stove, and there stood there a frumenty pottage for 6. The acorn, who knew what he was about, immediately leaped into the pottage, the little cord stretched itself out on the threshold, the grandfather placed the little watermill on the bench, the drake sat upon the stove, and the grandfather himself stood in the corner. Suddenly he heard a crashing and a trembling in the wood, and Fairlioka came along on one leg, in a wooden boot, leaning on his crutch and smiling from ear to ear. Fairlioka came up to the hut, threw down some firewood on the floor, and began to light the fire in the stove. But the acorn, who was sitting in the pottage, fell a-singing, "Pee, pee, pee, to beat Fairlioka come we." Fairlioka flew into a rage and seized the pot by the handle, but the handle broke, and all the pottage was scattered over the floor, and the acorn leaped out of the pot and flipped Fairlioka in his one eye, so that it was put out entirely. Fairlioka fell a-shrieking, fought about the air with his arms, and would have made for the door. But where was the door? He could not see it. Then the little cord wound itself about his legs, and he fell on the threshold, and the little watermill on the top of him off the bench. Then the grandfather rushed out of the corner and pitched into him with his iron crutch, and the drake on the top of the stove screeched with all its might, "So, so, so, pitch into him, pitch into him." Neither his wrath nor his strength was of any good to Fairlioka. The grandfather beat him to death with his iron crutch, and after that destroyed his hut and laid bare the dungeon beneath it, and out of the dungeon he drew his grandchildren, and dragged all Fairlioka's riches home to his old woman. And so he lived and prospered with his old woman and his grandchildren, and plucked and ate his peas in peace and quiet. So there is a Skazha for you, and I deserve a cake or two also. End of Fairlioka, recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.